wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Announcements. Statements by ministers. Papers to be laid. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Mr. President, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 33 of 2022, St. Lucia Parliament, Proclamation proroguing Parliament. Statutory Instrument number 34 of 2022, St. Lucia Parliament, Appointment of Session of Parliament. Statutory Instrument number 35 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument number 36 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument number 37 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Testing and Quarantine number 3 Regulations. Statutory Instrument number 38 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Protocol, Public Omnibus number 3 Regulations. Statutory Instrument number 39 of 2022, Legal Profession Eligibility, Desiree Tony Valentine Order. Statutory Instrument number 40 of 2022, Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, Court Proceedings Fee, St. Lucia Amendment Rules. Statutory Instrument number 41 of 2022, Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic, Designation of Inspectors Order. Statutory Instrument number 42 of 2022, Price Control Amendment number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument number 43 of 2022, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument number 44 of 2022, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, Hotel Chocolat Estates Limited Order. Statutory Instrument number 45 of 2022, Tourism Incentive Stony Hill, St. Lucia Order. Statutory Instrument number 46 of 2022, Legal Profession Eligibility, Leonette Latries Headley Order. Estimates of Expenditure, Revenue and Expenditure 2022-2023, Social and Economic Review 2021.
Motions. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion, standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1) of the Public Finance Management Act, number 14 of 2020, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or other financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed from the government must be paid into and from part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow $3,830,000 US from the International Development Bank, International Development Association, and US $3,710,000 from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, acting as the administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund for the purpose of financing the renewable energy sector development project. And whereas, in the case of the loan from the International Development Association, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is half of 1% per annum. And B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum, plus the basis adjustment and service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum C, the loan repayable over a period of 30 years, inclusive of the grace period of 10 years, in semi-annual installments of each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. And whereas, in the case of the loan from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as the administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund, A, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is half of 1% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable over a period of 15 years, inclusive of a grace period of 5 years, in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $3,830,000 from the International Development Association and an amount of US $3,710,000 from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, acting as an administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund for the purpose of financing the renewable energy sector development project. Be it resolved that A, in the case of a loan from the International Development Association, 1, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is half of 1% per annum, and 2, the service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is greater of A, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 0.75% per annum. 3, the loan is repayable over a period of 30 years, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years, in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. In the case of the loan from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development as an administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund, 1. The commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. 2. The service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum. The loan is repayable over a period of 15 years, inclusive of a grace period of 5 years, semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US dollars 3,830,000 from the International Development Association and an amount of US dollars 3,710,000 from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, acting as administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund for the purpose of financing the renewable energy sector development project. Be it further resolved that A, in the case of the loan from the International Development Association, 1, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. 2, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum. 3, the loan is repayable over a period of 30 years, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years, in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. B, in the case of the loan from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as the administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund, 1, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. 2, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum. 3, the loan is repayable over a period of 15 years, inclusive of a grace period of 5 years, in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. I didn't see your light, sir.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to add my voice to a few comments on this motion. Mr. President, the purpose with which the monies are being borrowed, it's for a good purpose. Renewable energy projects, very critical, especially, Mr. Speaker, given the fact that the volatility of the price of oil on the global market. But, Mr. President, I must remind this administration that it was this same government, while in opposition, that had such stiff opposition to borrowing. Even when it was explained to them that the loans had very concessionary terms, even when it was explained to them that there were moratoriums on those loans, and so the debt burden would not necessarily be exacerbated, they told the people of St. Lucia that borrowing was a sin. That is what they campaigned on. And so I find it somewhat not just perplexing, but hypocritical that we would come to this house and, we have millions of dollars here that we're looking to borrow. The other point that this SLP, the St. Lucia Labour Party, made while in opposition to borrowing, and why I want to stand against this motion, is that they said that monies from these organizations, that you could have given it to people. And so while people were going through the pandemic, whilst people were jobless, whilst we saw the unemployment situation affecting many families, what we did, Mr. President, was to try to stimulate the economy, providing jobs by investing in capital projects such as these, energy projects, public infrastructure, which are necessary, in line with what the international donor agencies or certain lenders would have. And so not because I'm in opposition now, I'm going to go as low as the St. Lucia Labour Party while they were in opposition, to tell the people that all of a sudden, monies can be available from the International Development Organization. Because, Mr. President, these organizations, they have their mandates. Certain organizations, you can only tap funding from them for certain programs. And the programs, they've got to be appropriate and specific, Mr. President, as it relates to what you're going to borrow the money for. And so really, I must say today in this House, without any fear, that this is totally hypocritical, that this is duplicity at its highest. This is shameful, Mr. President, and I can't believe that the same people who, not so long ago, were talking about borrowing. In fact, they even had promotions. They put social media campaigns to say, this is Borrowing Tuesday, and they misled the people of St. Lucia. And so Mr. President, what we want to do is to always be honest with the citizens of this country. And what we want to do is to ensure that politics is never put over sensible solutions. This is why they have been unable, Mr. President, to deliver on a lot of the realistic promises that they have made to the population, because the reality of government has now hit them like a ball of fire that they don't know what to do. And so, Mr. President, instead, what we see is a government coming back to what normal governments do, and you have to borrow. This is what I call egg on your faces. And so you can mislead people, you can fool people on a range of the issues, but when it comes to borrowing, it is inescapable for all of us. But let's be honest with the people of St. Lucia. For once, please, be honest with the people of St. Lucia. And I will not let my voice rest on these issues. And, you know, there's more on this subject about the overall debt situation on the country. But I just wanted to say, Mr. President, that, of course, to invest in renewable energies, this is a program that we started in trying to remove the dependence on fossil fuel, which, Mr. President, by the way, is having untold effect on our economic space at present. Manufacturing, tourism, and the inputs, Mr. President, which are very vital for the advancement of our economy in a number of sectors, are absolutely crucial to ensure that we invest in renewable energies. There's absolutely no problems with that. But the hypocrisy, the shameful duplicity which is being mentioned here today is unacceptable. I thank you very much.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. I never thought I would have been given such an early opportunity to deal with what I suspect is going to be a long day. Mr. President, let me remind the Leader of Government Business that we haven't even gone into the opposition business. I don't think he has no, yeah. That we haven't even gotten into the appropriations bill yet. So he probably would save some of his energy for that. Mr. President, also, today is Thursday, and We have had, if you check the months, more than 9 months in government, and if you multiply that by 4, that's about 36 plus 2, about 40 months in government. And unlike what the leader of government business said, I didn't stand on a point of order, but I will say that we never had a borrowing Tuesday. What we said was that the government used to have a mardi puete. That's what was out there. So I need to correct him. We never said that. Also, Mr. President, there have been about 40 Tuesdays since we've been in government, and this government has not come to this house to borrow a cent. So he has just now accentuated a fact that I didn't even want to talk about, that today is Thursday, so we still have not had a mardi puete. And I'm not sure if he was competent enough to try to go down the road of borrowing. So, Mr. President, the member or the leader of opposition business, in attempting to already so early in the morning take this debate down a path that I think will give us a lot more opportunity to deal with the atrocities that we had to suffer before, I just wanted to make sure that I remind him that the issue of borrowing for the people, I think he mentioned that in opposition we were saying that the money should be given to the people. When we debate the appropriations bill, there will be umpteen opportunity for us to show and tell the St. Lucian people how we're going to spend and how we're going to use whatever we do to help them and to spend or use on their behalf. So, Mr. President, I think I will save the rest for another time. At this point, I just thought I should remind the opposition and the leader of opposition business of the real truth about what was happening and not the fallacy that he's trying to bring in so early in the debate. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US dollars $3,830,000 from the International Development Association and an amount of US dollars $3,710,000 from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, acting as administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund for the purpose of financing the renewable energy sector development project. Be it further resolved that A, in the case of the loan from the International Development Association, 1, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is half of 1% per annum. 2, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum. 3, the loan is repayable over a period of 30 years, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years, in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. B, in the case of the loan from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as the administrator of the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility Single Donor Trust Fund, 1, the commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is half of 1% per annum. 2, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum. 3, the loan is repayable over a period of 15 years, inclusive of a grace period of 5 years in semi-annual installments on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion, standing in my name. Yeah, thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 12 to allow this National Savings and Development Bond Act resolution of Parliament to raise funds by the issuance of serving bonds to be presented after the Appropriations Bill.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order 12 be suspended in order to allow the National Savings and Development Bonds Act resolution of Parliament to raise funds by issue of saving bonds to be presented after the Appropriation Bill. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bills. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move for the presentation of the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Appropriation 2022-2023.
Appropriation 2022-2023.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to enable this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honourable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Honourable Leader of Government Business, you may proceed.
Thank you, Sarge. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I stand on behalf of this government.
Honourable Leader of Government Business, I think you need to request.
I will request.
Move for the second reading, please.
The enthusiasm is there, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Appropriation 2022-2023. Mr. President, as I was saying, I stand on behalf of this government in this Honourable Senate to present or make a small presentation on the theme, or on a budget with a theme that is very clear in its intention of transforming of our economy and empowering our people. Mr. President, this budget is not about emotion and sensationalization. It's not about promises unfulfilled, but it's about building and rebuilding a resilient and progressive society and economy that is predicated upon a very strong philosophy that the government that I'm part of the St. Lucia Labour Party, stands on, and that is bread, freedom, and justice. Mr. President, in doing so, we also are very mindful of obedience to the rule of law. And so everything we do in this process will uphold the rule of law. Mr. President, in 2021, or between 2016 and 2021, the then opposition ran an entire campaign on the theme of putting our people first. We were able to get this message across to the people of St. Lucia, who demonstrated on the 26th of July 2021 that they believe in this message, and so gave us a handsome 15-2 majority at the polls. Mr. President, we will not come here to squander that opportunity, but to work on behalf of the people of St. Lucia. And this budget intends to present the people of this country with a clear understanding of how we intend to do such. And so the policies and the programs articulated in this budget, Mr. President, by the Honorable Prime Minister and by our other colleague ministers and parliamentarians in the lower house, have clearly sought out to articulate the policies that this government intends to proceed with in the next fiscal period. Mr. President, despite the hardships that were induced upon us as a country, first of all by COVID, and now more recently by the war in Ukraine, and notably by the previous UWP government that has landed us in this predicament, notwithstanding, Mr. President, we intend to ensure that our government lays the foundation for ensuring that St. Lucians can survive and prosper in this difficult environment. And that is why, Mr. President, we have established, or we have decided, that we will attempt to provide a decent wage for our workers. And that is why, effective April of this year, our public servants received their salary increase that was promised to them, but had not been delivered previously. And that is why, Mr. President, we have started on this note. Despite our government in the last 9 months not borrowing a cent, we have been able to stabilize this economy and to provide hope for our people. And now we come to the budget with proposals, policy position that is going to give us the impetus we need to rescue this economy. So, Mr. President, I begin with the sector that is perhaps the most critical one at this point that will help us achieve this objective and help us to rebound from the effects of COVID and what we inherited from the previous government. Mr. President, tourism is a sector that is perhaps the highest contributor, or not perhaps, but is definitely the higher contributor to foreign exchange and employment in our private sector and to this country. And so, Mr. President, having recognized that, from very early, we started a very aggressive marketing campaign and a strategy that focused on the uniqueness of the tourism product in our country to our target markets. And Mr. President, within the first few weeks of us being in office, we were able to experience or see the return of one of our airlines, and I'll go back to that shortly. We were able to see significant growth in stayover arrivals in the cruise sector. We were able to see arrivals of tourists for 2021 being 40% higher than the projected figures. And so far, in the first quarter, Mr. President, up to March of this year, stayover arrivals have been over 80,000, which exceeded our projected figures. Mr. President, in March, we saw a recorded 32,111 arrivals, representing 21% above the projected figures. And the projections for the rest of this year remain very encouraging and we expect increased airlift and increased economic activity from these figures. We're very happy to welcome back Virgin Atlantic, Mr. President, out of the UK last December. We're also happy to welcome Sunwing Airlines from Canada and the inaugural visits of at least 10 cruise vessels in the last few months. I would have liked to have gone through them, Mr. President, but I want to get to other things. The inaugural visits signaled confidence and in a COVID environment that the cruise sector is willing to come to our shores and willing to provide us with opportunities for growth. But, Mr. President, it's not just about the numbers, because I sat in this opposition chair some years ago and I listened to people just throwing numbers at us, numbers, record numbers. Mr. President, there is no real benefit in numbers if these numbers are not redound to benefits to the people of this country. And so, we saw it fit, Mr. President, while the numbers are good and while the numbers are returning, to introduce as a government the community tourism bill, which was passed in this very House a few weeks ago. Mr. President, we have committed to spending about 9 million, as allocated in the estimates, for pushing the sector to ensure that these numbers translate to activity within the communities and therefore to reach the people that we represent. Mr. President, we also believe that in certain communities of this country, we want the tourism dollar to be spent. And so we have, in this particular budget, included plans for support in community tourism for the communities such as Labrie, through the Labrie market. And I want to say specifically, Mr. President, the craft market in Choiseul. And unlike previous governments, we are investing in opposition constituencies, Mr. President. The constituency of Choiseul, we know, is not one of the constituencies represented by the government or by the government side. But we recognize the need to invest in all of St. Lucia because we're a government for all of the people of St. Lucia. And so, Mr. President, we are investing in all of the communities, including Choiseul. And so we have no doctrine or nothing like that on our agenda. The people of Choiseul did not put a representative from the Labour Party into office, but they are our people. Mr. President, our room stock is going to be increased. And I want to mention quickly that we have a new development at Sandals, refurbishing of 2 properties at Halcyon and Latok. We also have a 94-room construction by Dreams at Casabar Resorts, similar to the Marriott concept. About $25 million to be invested in there. The courtyard at Point Seraphine, Mr. President, that project is on stream, and we expect about 42 million US or 100 million EC investment to go in there. And we know the caliber of visitors that these resorts attract, high spend, and I think we will stand to benefit there. I also want to mention briefly, Mr. President, the ORTCP, the Organization of Regional Competitive Project, on stream, and that is also projected to bring about employment opportunities for our people. Mr. President, just recently I was part of a delegation that attended the Sea Trade Royal in Miami, and we have seen the intention of a number of new cruise vessels and cruise agencies expressing an interest in visiting our shores. I look forward to that in the coming weeks. Mr. President, this government understands that in this environment, investment is key. And we are aware of the challenges faced because of the war, the actions of the Russian president are having implications for our Citizen by Investment program, for the entire region, and so we have to be able to navigate this investment situation very carefully. However, Mr. President, in the diaspora, we are engaging our people there, and we are hoping that we'll keep our eye close on the Ukraine war, but we are very targeted in the markets that we are going to for investment, especially foreign direct investment. Mr. President, under the creative industries, as was announced by the Prime Minister, we have allocated $500,000 to assist in developing some of the programs in that industry, including Carnival, which we know is a serious talking point, trying to negotiate and navigate with the challenge of COVID. But I believe that the $3 million put in there will redound to a lot more, because a lot of us may not recognize that, Mr. President, but Carnival is actually the single biggest economic activity that takes place in this country. In the 2 weeks of Carnival, if you look at the impact, it is second to none in this country. And so, while we have to respect our situation with health, we have to navigate carefully. We will be guided by the CMO and the Ministry of Health. We intend to bring back activities that stimulate the economy and allow for our country to rebound. Mr. President, the agricultural sector is the next sector that I think is critical in this particular situation. And in this budget, we see an effort by this government and an intention to really give a boost to this sector. We've always known that tourism cannot survive on its own, and it needs the nexus in agriculture, between itself and agriculture, to do well. And so, Mr. President, the agricultural sector right now is trending positively in the right direction in the area of food production, fisheries, and exports. I want to mention, Mr. President, that food security remains a very high priority for this government. And as we know, right now, global supply chains are under serious threat. We know that there are serious challenges with COVID, particularly now with the war with the European markets and the chain, particularly with the supply of wheat. We know natural gas and petroleum. So we have to be very careful how we maneuver with our agricultural sector to focus more critically on feeding ourselves, as well as earning revenue from whatever we can export. And keeping in mind the situation in Europe, we have embarked on exploring regional markets for the export of our agricultural products. Mr. President, we are also looking to make farmland more readily available for our farmers so that they will be able to be more resilient and more efficient in conducting their affairs. We have many farmers in this country who want to engage in agricultural practice, but they have no land, they have nowhere to do it, and the places that they have sometimes would not be conducive or appropriate for the crops and the activity that they want to engage in. So we'll be very, very careful in land rationalization, especially in the south of the island, to ensure that our farmers are in the conversation. Mr. President, I was very pleased to have heard that the Prime Minister announced the intention to reduce the tax on fuel for the fishers who have suffered from the time that this tax was imposed, and we have heard the discussion on that. I was also pleased to hear the 7-crop diversification program that was mentioned by the Minister for Agriculture that will help to provide more efficiency in the way we go about doing our business. And the availability of inputs, Mr. President, is one of the issues that has been troubling our farmers for a long time. And now we know that we have received quite a lot of that, including fertilizers and other inputs, to allow farmers to access and to be able to make their crop ready and available for the market. Mr. President, I also want to mention through the agricultural sector that we need to focus on the value-added approach. We have had a culture of exporting the raw material and not doing much more to add value to the products that we can come up with. And through the Ministry of Commerce, Agriculture, and the Youth Economy, Mr. President, we will see more focus on the value-added factor in the area of bananas, CMOS, cocoa, and other crops. Mr. President, there is also an increase, we also intend to increase the export potential of CMOS. In the south of the island, I think those of us who live on the coastal areas, we will see that there is a renewed interest among CMOS farmers to really engage in that sector. Right now, they basically export most of what they produce, but if we can get into, allow the Ministry of Commerce that they can begin to add value to that, to have other products, I think they will be doing well. It gives a buffer for other areas that may have been affected, like bananas. Mr. President, I also was very pleased, I'm very pleased to mention that we are going to have some focus on honey production and beekeeping. This is a sector that has been underutilized. We know that because of climate change, there are threats to the environment and the conditions for bee farmers to really do well, but they need support, and this is a sector that we intend to invest in. Mr. President, I want to now move to an area that, despite the challenges that we face, is perhaps even more critical with regard to our human resource. And every time I stand in this House, even when I was in opposition, I think I was the spokesperson in that regard, because I always made reference to the development of our human resource. So that takes us to the department that is most critically responsible for the development of our human resource, and that is education. Mr. President, the education sector at this time has suffered and requires a very creative and innovative approach for the students, the young people, and that sector to do well. And so we have recognized that ICT is part of the educational infrastructure that we must pay attention to. And COVID taught us a very good lesson in that regard. And educational support in these areas is key. Mr. President, in that regard, I'm very happy to report or to inform the Senate that our government has procured 12,000 laptops. 12,000 in the 9 months, without borrowing a cent, that is. And, Mr. President, the e-books idea that was used in favor of our laptops has shown that they are really no good. And the teachers and the principals have complained. And so, we really are very excited about making sure that we bring back that concept of allowing our students to access e-learning and have the tools to do so. I'm very pleased with the principals, the teachers, the parents, the education officers, and all of those who have embraced the idea of doing so. Mr. President, CVQ and TVET training has to be part of our thrust forward. Civics education. And I can say so because the Prime Minister, in his allocation of portfolios, included vocational studies as part of the education ministry. And so I am very pleased to see that we have the development of 2 workforce centers in this country, and bringing back the care, concept of the care center. I am sure my colleague, Education Parliamentary Secretary, will elaborate on that. We really have, Mr. President, if we want to develop this sector, to broaden the base and the foundation of our education sector. And that means we have to pay attention to early childhood and the primary education programs that we offer. So the curriculum in the primary education program is being strengthened to include areas such as critical thinking, conflict resolution, problem solving, emotional intelligence. In other words, we are teaching students how to learn and how to think and how to live. It's not just dealing with, book content. If you don't know how to live, you can be bright, but you may not be productive. Mr. President, I think that's in line with one of our primary schools' mottos, which is not just for school, but for life. I think it's RC Boys. One of our schools has that as a motto, and I think this is a very important undertaking. Mr. President, we need to inculcate a greater sense of identity in our children, in our people, through the education sector. And that is why the introduction of African and St. Lucian history into the primary school curriculum has been articulated by our Prime Minister. We believe that this is what allows us to be able to identify who we are and where we're going. Mr. President, we also think that the digital curriculum has to be invested in. And through the OECS Program for Educational and Relevant Learning, the OECS PEARL, that is intended to push that particular agenda. So, Mr. President, through this program, we will see about 5 early childhood centers, Madam Parliamentary Secretary, being developed and provided with assistance and devices, especially for students with special needs. So nobody is going to be left behind in that regard. Mr. President, this program will also help to expand the primary curriculum beyond just the academics. And I think we have an opposition senator who has been an educator. I think she will be able to identify with what that has done to our children in the past. We believe also that coming out of the COVID situation, we have to be prepared in case there is another wave or another pandemic, that our teachers, our students, our parents will be better prepared to make better use of e-learning so that they will not be affected as they have been before. Mr. President, also in education, more specifically secondary education, this government has decided to increase accessibility and self-directed learning. Education has to be affordable and accessible. If not, there's no point, trying to get there. If you can't access and you can't afford, then you won't get a chance. Our Cxc Payments for students, Mr. President, is one of the steps that we've taken to ensure that our children who wish to write their CSEC subjects can write them. And that is why we intend to have up to 5 Cxc subjects being taken care of or funded by the government so that students can pay and write the exams. That is on the back of facilities fees that we have decided to pay, Mr. President. That is also on the back of school bursaries that we continue to provide. And the nation's children will continue to benefit from that. And hopefully, when the smart classroom environments or the virtual learning environments are enhanced, they can take advantage. Mr. President, the 1 university graduate per child was a concept that the Prime Minister has been talking about. I just want to rephrase it as 1 graduate per household. We believe that, as Arthur Lewis correctly articulated, education, knowledge, is the key to economic development. And that we recognize that if in St. Lucia we can ensure that at least in every single household there is at least 1 individual who has accessed higher level education, it gives the family a better chance of competing and surviving in this very competitive and difficult environment. So, Mr. President, this concept will be further developed, and we intend in that way to, as the Prime Minister announced, provide tax relief for business places who are willing to assist their employees in pursuing higher learning. That is an incentive that not only will benefit public, but also the private sector. Mr. President, Arthur Lewis, I believe I'll leave more of that to my colleague, but we have been talking about this full-fledged university thing for a while, and there is need for us to engage the relevant stakeholders to push that agenda. I believe that after the first few months, we have done some stock taking, and we have recognized that there are some challenges, and we intend to take them on. Innovation is part of the education portfolio, Mr. President, and I believe that the region, as a region, we need to become an academic hub, where we use our human resource to be able to bring in revenue and develop our people. And so we have to collaborate with the persons in our diaspora to ensure that they can come back. A lot of them have left what we call brain drain. We invest in them, they go to university, they get scholarships, and they stay, they don't return. So we have to find ways in this country to incentivize and have our good brains to return to this country and give back and help develop our sector. Mr. President, I now move to another critical area, perhaps one of those areas that was battered and bruised so badly in the last 5 years, and that is the health sector. Mr. President, no country can prosper and do well if its human resource is not nurtured, if there is no good educational, social protection, and a proper health care program. The people, if they are not healthy, they will not be productive. If people are always sick, you will have low productivity at the workplace. There are people who will not come to your country to invest if they do not see a proper health care facility or proper health care program. And so, Mr. President, we now do not want to get engaged in any back and forth about what we should do, but we are heading forward with our health sector improvement programs. Mr. President, on the front burner is UHC, Universal Health Care. And we have to be more efficient in the delivery of primary health care through UHC. Mr. President, there are other members in this Senate who probably will be better, will give some more treatment to this. But I want to ensure that I mention that the health strengthening, system strengthening project funded by the World Bank will be embarked upon to do just as it says. That's what it says, and that's what it should do. Elderly Affairs, Mr. President, is now a special government department. And under that department, we intend to contribute to the improvement of healthcare provided for the elderly. And very soon, Mr. President, there will be an announcement of how the elderly healthcare program is going to be expanded by this government. I will not preempt the Prime Minister, but it will come very soon. So, Mr. President, we also believe that the public health benefits to the elderly through social assistance also need to be expanded so that our older folk can access better health care with a lot less stress on their pockets. Mr. President, the range and scope of the elderly care program, as I said, will be expanded, and we now have to pay careful attention to the situation at St. Jude Hospital. It's not something I like to talk about because I've seen the pain it has caused us as a country. And I think we should spend no more time quarreling about it, but we need to get into the business of doing what we have to do and completing it. So the reconstruction program, Mr. President, at St. Jude will commence this year, and it will be on the original site as we had always promised, while conditions at the stadium, which is the temporary site, will be made a lot more comfortable for those who are there awaiting the transition. Mr. President, I now move to another sector that relates to the human resource capital in this country, and that is youth development and sports. It happens to be an area that I worked with as a volunteer throughout my entire life as a young man. Mr. President, and I still do because I'm still a young man. Mr. President, we have to address the issue of unemployment among young people, and sports development is one of the avenues for doing that. It also is one of the avenues for better, for our young people to live healthier and more full and healthy lifestyles. Mr. President, through the youth economy, we will use that as a vehicle to transform our youth skills, that is the skills of our youth, into their careers and their hobbies into entrepreneurship. The youth economy, Mr. President, is an idea that this Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of this government, has been very passionate about, and it is now within the Ministry of Economic Development. We want this economy to be driven through technology, innovation, and ideas that are grown from within, from home, from the grassroots. Mr. President, a total of $10 million, I was very happy to hear, has been allocated in this fiscal period. Mr. President, around our country, there was an abomination right before us of all our sporting facilities, small sporting facilities in the small communities being abandoned. And when our populace, spoke about it and made some noise, the last government embarked on an artificial turf, I don't know what to call it, which we now have to deal with. And so, Mr. President, we will engage in a more comprehensive approach to the renovation and maintenance of our sporting facilities and infrastructure around this country. including our playing fields and our courts. We also will continue to incentivize our young athletes. We have people like Naomi London and our prospective Olympian Alfred, right, who are now on the verge of taking us to the Olympics. We have to invest in their future and make it possible for them to be able to access resources of the state so that they can excel to their full potential. Mr. President, I now move to housing. Again, Mr. President, you cannot grow an economy, you cannot develop your people if you do not take care of the holistic needs. I have spoken about tourism, where you talk about bringing in foreign exchange, education, healthcare, youth development. Housing is one of the areas that can seriously impact the lives of people. And if they are under conditions, they live in conditions that are inhumane, there are other factors that you notice about their behavior and even their achievement. As a school principal, it was sometimes very easy to determine where children came from based on how they behave. And that was sad, because the things they say, the things they are exposed to, these things are manifested in their conduct. And so housing is a serious area that we need to pay attention to. And we have to make residential lots available and affordable for ordinary people in St. Lucia to be able to own a piece of the state. We also have to be able to ensure that there is an equitable plane on which every St. Lucian can access proper facility, for proper land and other housing needs. Mr. President, I just want to quickly mention that even in the opposition constituency, as I said again, this government is actually embarking on land rationalization in Miku South, in the constituency of the leader of the opposition. I was hoping he would come and talk about it, and say how he feels about that investment. But in Angers and in Angers and in Tirochet, Mr. President, we intend to go and continue that particular program. And we do not have to be afraid to say who started it. It's not about that. It's about whether it is good for the people. And if it's good for the people, regardless who started it, Mr. President, we will continue it. Mr. President, we also have areas like PI in Lafargue, again, an opposition constituency. Land rationalization going on there. The PROUD program for unplanned development will be reintroduced in areas like Olio, Bruceville, POM, and Opicor. So, Mr. President, there is clearly a comprehensive approach to this, and not singling out any particular constituencies or ostracizing others. Physical development and infrastructure. We continue with the West Coast Road, which is projected to provide between 250 to 300 jobs. Mr. President, employment is critical, and we have to reduce the unemployment numbers, and that is one of the projects that is expected to do that. We are going to restart with the discussions with the QATs to do the Castries-Grosile Main Road. And, Mr. President, we assure you that this government will not, in the process, we will not spend $60 million on 2 miles of road. We're not going to do that. Mr. President, the Huronora International Airport reconstruction will continue. And the PPP agreement that this government departed from to put us in debt of over $450 million, and still we have no airport. We will revisit the PPP agreement or the PPP arrangement and perhaps be able to relieve our government of that debt burden that will essentially reduce our debt to GDP ratio. Mr. President, having considered the review of a team that was put in place to deal with this, the government will not engage in just sporadic actions. We will be guided by the technocrats, and their recommendations will guide us as to how we go forward. I now move, Mr. President, to our area of national security. We will all agree that there have been serious concerns in the rate of crime in this country. We're not going to hide behind it. We will have to face it head on, accept that it is a problem, and deal with it. We're not going to make excuses and say who caused it or whose fault it is or under which administration we had the most crime. And this is not going to solve crime, Mr. President. What is going to solve crime and what is going to give us a better comfort in this country and make us feel safer is not what politicians say on platforms, but the actions that the government takes to help resolve the problem. We have already nipped it in the bud. We are nipping it in the bud through the social interventions, through the way in which we develop our human resource so that they are less likely to cause or to be involved in crime. And when there is a problem with crime, we then have to deal with the problem. It cannot be about the police alone. It cannot be about the prisons alone. It has to be a full, comprehensive approach. So having given quite a few of these, Mr. President, I want to also inform the Senate or remind the Senate that there will be an approach that involves intelligence gathering, surveillance, and improved social justice, the rate at which justice is delivered and administered. Mr. President, solving crime also requires reducing and eliminating the causes of crime, and that is one of the things we have been trying to do from the time we assumed office. So that is why we are engaging in social support, reduction of unemployment, the poor socioeconomic conditions. I mentioned that in housing a while ago. Investment and job creation, particularly through the youth economy, to reduce youth unemployment. Mr. President, these measures are intentional and deliberate. We also need to take care of the existing problems with the Viewfort police station. We realize that a little mold problem that may have taken less than $1 million to solve has now become a major problem of renovating an entire roof of a police station because somebody somehow thought it wasn't good enough to just solve the mold problem. Mr. President, we have to address issues at Bodily. The new police headquarters, we heard about the knocking down of the prisons. Nothing happened after that. We also believe that we will continue, as we have done, to provide vehicles for our police. And we have already provided 16, Mr. President, in the last 9 months. And as they are required, this government will continue to make sure that the police can get to the points from point A to B by providing them with the necessary vehicles. Mr. President, I move quickly now to commerce and business development. The enabling environment has to be provided for us to do business in this country. And I think at some time we were very highly ranked in terms of the region for ease of doing business. And we saw how that, regressed. But we intend to take us back to those days. And so this government will ensure that the viability of grants, soft loans, and soft loan facilities will be tapped into by our medium and small business, our micro enterprises. Mr. President, this will provide access to much needed capital for small business owners. And these will include, one of my colleagues will be happy to hear me say that, single women who otherwise may have struggled to be able to access finance to help themselves. Mr. President, we need people to be able to generate revenue for themselves. We can't give everybody a job, but we can help people create jobs. And so, Mr. President, we believe that almost 17,000 new jobs can be created through that initiative. It will not be one time, but over time we expect that to happen because every one can create jobs for others. And so $10 million has been allocated to back it up in the estimates for that program. Mr. President, we had a government who came in within our first few months in government to take action regarding marijuana. We came here and we decriminalized a certain quantity. People spoke about it and played games with it for years. But this government came to this house and I stood here proudly and dealt with it. And so we will continue to help in the efforts of commercializing marijuana, cannabis, and also make it part of our business development agenda. We also need to look at the issue of fiscal and economic measures to bring relief to our people. And so, Mr. President, there is reason for me now to remind this House or the Senate why the Prime Minister announced the $500 one-off payment to our pensioners as of July. Mr. President, the issue of tax breaks, persons earning less than $25,000 annually or less than $2,000 a month getting tax breaks. $10,000 duty waiver for traveling officers, long overdue. They've been asking for it. We will see that happen this year. The waiver of tax penalties, Mr. President, outstanding taxes for people who have not been paying the taxes, we cannot collect the taxes, and they continue to owe. These waivers will allow them to be able to deal with the existing interest, and so that they can become compliant. Mr. President, one of the relief areas is pharmaceuticals, access to medication. That is an area that we intend to bring some relief, and including some basic food items like chicken, which is a highly consumed protein among St. Lucians. Mr. President, finally, the government will ensure that the CDP, the Community Development Program, is going to be made accessible for all constituencies, all 17. And again, I was hoping that the opposition would have spoken about how they were going to use these monies to benefit the people in the constituency. I think one of the members, to be fair, did allude to that. But again, we are not discriminating, and $28.5 million through the Republic of China and Taiwan grants and facilities will be available to ensure that all constituencies can benefit. So, Mr. President, this government has decided that we will engage in a very comprehensive approach to the way we go about this budget. We have decided that social support, economic growth and stabilization. We have also decided that investment in agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, commerce, the youth economy, and stimulating small business enterprises, medium business enterprises, direct foreign investment with target markets. These are measures that we believe in this particular environment need to be taken to be able to stabilize this economy and set the foundation for the next 4 years following this year for our country to recover. We will not be distracted, Mr. President. We will not be swayed. We remain focused. Our policy measures, Mr. President, are deliberate. They are aimed at bringing relief for the more vulnerable while we reposition this country to navigate the challenges of the times. And, Mr. President, in a spirit of collaboration, inclusion, integrity, and the rule of law that I started with, we look to towards putting this country back on a sustainable path of growth and prosperity through the actions that we take in this budget. And so I present this appropriation bill to the Senate for discussion, and what I hope will bring about some fruitful outcome to the benefit of the people of this country. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question is that the Appropriation 2022-2023 bill Senator Showery.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to make my contribution, Mr. President, to this, my first policy debate, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, Mr. President, on the presentation of his maiden budget. And I thank you, Mr. President, and the Senate for the opportunity to allow me to address a few substantive issues, a few substantive pronouncements as it relates to the budget. Allow me, Mr. President, to also thank those who continue to support and encourage me as I endeavor to assist in the formulation of policy for our country, St. Lucia, those who continue to constructively criticize, and those who lend support and assistance as I chart this path, Mr. President. Mr. President, in my analysis of the budget presented by the Prime Minister, we've heard the pronouncement that it is in fact the largest budget in the history of St. Lucia. And for me, Mr. President, on reviewing, on contemplating on the content of the budget, the most significant aspect of it for me was not with regards to its size, but with regards, Mr. President, to a few pertinent questions that I think really is what determines how good of a budget it is, Mr. President. And when I looked over and when I listened, when I read through the budget, Mr. President, some of the obvious questions and some of the obvious items that I used to determine how efficient or how good this budget would be for our people, does it meet the current needs of our people? What is in it for the poor and the underprivileged of our country? And how will it bring relief to the many who have been affected as a result of COVID-19, as a result of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and as a result of what I deem to be 5 years of neglect, victimization, and misplaced priorities by the previous government? Monsieur Président, ça moi ka di c'est là moi garder budget a. C'est question moi demander comment pour prendre détermination as est budget ça là c'est un budget qui bon pour Jean pays Saint-Lucie. C'est ainsi budget a ka joindre situation nous joindre qu'on nous dans ainsi ka doit c'est situation Monsieur Président. Ainsi budget ça là ni bagaille dans pour adresser situation gens qui pauvres et gens qui pas privilège jeune koyo dedans et monsieur président ainsi il kay mener titak space by gens qui a affecté because of COVID-19 la ni wa ka aller en Ukraine et c'est moun qui joine plus affecté 5 l'année parce yote la teni neglect yote I mean Newton manière previous administration a parlé about certain constituency côté yo décidé yo just pas kay faire rien ces constituency ça là yo pas kay mettre resources dans ces constituency ça là because yo pas supporter direction gouvernement previous gouvernement Mr. Speaker Mr. President so un budget qui présenté par premier ministre là supposé en opinion moi adresser ces bagaille ça là. And so, Mr. President, I want to focus on a few areas. I know my colleagues are adequately versed to deal with a lot of the areas, and so I will not deal with all of them, but those I feel that have stood out to me. And of course, as it may be obvious, Mr. President, I will begin by looking at what was placed in the budget for the agricultural and fisheries sector, Mr. President. Of course, we've heard it. We've heard the pronouncements. We've continued to speak about food security. And of course, we have been placed in a situation, and I keep saying that as much as COVID-19 has affected a lot of things in our country, a lot of things in the world, Mr. President, we really need to look at the situation of COVID-19 and pull out what are the lessons we can learn from that situation. And at the end of it, Mr. President, are we coming out of it the better prepared to ensure that our country is more secure when it comes to food for the citizens of our country. And so, of course, I would have looked at this budget and asked myself, in the allocations for the agriculture, fisheries, food production, and rural development sector, what is in there for the people of St. Lucia? I have looked at the budget, Mr. President, and I must say that I am pleased to report that I am happy about the plans presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and supported by the Minister of Agriculture in terms of the trajectory that we are looking to take our country to when it comes to food production and when it comes to the plans for the agriculture and fisheries sector. Mr. President, if we look at the Economic and Social Review of 2021, page 31, for those of us who may want to follow, it notes that there were financing difficulties and there were high input costs brought about by COVID-19 that further impeded the sector's performance. And to me, what that says, Mr. President, is that we already have a platform and a basis by which we can build on in order to ensure that we are sustainable when it comes to the production of our food and feeding our people. Because even in a period where we were experiencing hardships, as noted in the Economic and Social Review, there was some level of expansion, and notably in the areas of livestock and fish. So there is hope for us. And so it's really up to a government of this day, Mr. President, to expand, to grow, to place the resources, the scarce resources of this country in a manner in that sector that will really help to build on where we are, Mr. President, to ensure that it achieves its goal. Mr. President, it's no secret to all of us that agriculture has been one of the sectors of our economy that has really kept us going. It's one of the biggest contributors, perhaps, maybe only behind tourism. But it has contributed significantly to the development of our country and to our economy. Mr. President, I was very excited and I listened very, very closely, especially to the Minister of Agriculture as he laid out the plans of his ministry where agriculture and fisheries is concerned. And I must say that I was very happy to hear some of the plans. And it's, of course, things that we've heard spoken about many times. But, Mr. President, it is important to understand that we need to put our shoulders to the wheel if we are to achieve our end goal of ensuring that there is food security for our country, St. Lucia. So, Mr. President, I will take a little time to delve into some of what I consider the most substantive issues that were raised. And I begin with the move to decrease the level of labor intensity and increase the level of mechanization and modernization in the agricultural sector, Mr. President. We may consider agriculture and the production of food as archaic because our people have done it forever, Mr. President. They've had to feed themselves forever. There have been some level of growth and some level of development in the agricultural sector, but I think that we are so far behind when it comes to improving and increasing the level of modernization and mechanization in that sector, Mr. President. And so I am very elated that I heard the minister pronounce that there will be a move to greater mechanization and greater modernization in that sector. Mr. President, we have to be strategic. We have to be strategic about how we move to modernize and mechanize that sector. Mr. President, too often we see governments spend monies on purchasing heavy equipment with a view to doing just that in the agricultural sector. But it is not supported by the necessary processes and procedures to ensure that there is a level of fairness and equity in the use and access to these equipment, Mr. President, so that every St. Lucian, despite where you are, if you are part of the agricultural sector, that you can benefit from it without prejudice, Mr. President. And so I look forward to the added procedures, like I said, the added processes in scheduling, for example, of a system. The government will spend monies, for example, to purchase a tiller, to purchase a machine to plow, Mr. President. But unless it is supported by a system whereby every farmer who requires use of it can be placed on a proper scheduling system, instead of having to wait sometimes for months upon end, and instead, Mr. President, of some of them being privileged by virtue of certain constituencies that they are placed in, because perhaps they have greater access to the Minister of Agriculture, and we know these things have happened in the past, that there is a level of equity and a level of fairness in the way in which they go about accessing these equipment, Mr. President. We heard of the pronouncement of the land rationalization, and as an effort to increase access to farmers, both those who are existing and those who want to come into the sector, Mr. President. There is a heavy thrust on ensuring that our youth can get access to agricultural lands, Mr. President, both to help in food security, but also for them to be able to create an economic avenue for themselves, Mr. President, to be able to create their own space, to be able to create their own way of gaining income, Mr. President. And so that for me is very important. The access to land, understanding what exists in terms of land, the different topographies, and making a wise decision in terms of what level of equipment and what type of equipment and mechanization we go into. Mr. President, in the agricultural sector, we have to be very serious about the increase of output. But to go hand in hand with an increase of output, Mr. President, we have to be serious about storage and preservation, Mr. President, to ensure that when we find ourselves in a situation where mobility is restricted, where importing is restricted, Mr. President, of whether it's raw materials or packaged foods or whatever the case may be, that we can sustain ourselves in St. Lucia, whilst we perhaps wait for the additional things that we need to be able to sustain ourselves. And so there must be a serious look and a serious move towards ensuring that we increase output. And one of the ways I think that we can do that, and you know, I heard the Minister of Agriculture allude to it, Mr. President, is one of the things that is very prohibitive to our farmers is the cost of the input required to ensure that they thrive, and to ensure that the bottom line is a bottom line that can actually sustain their families and lend itself to the GDP of our country. One of the areas that I know the land farmers cry a lot about, because it is a troubling aspect of it, Mr. President, is a prohibitive cost of fertilizers. And so I think it is the time, Mr. President, where we look at what exists, Mr. President, and ask ourselves, how could we actually lend support to ensuring that our farmers can reduce the cost of their fertilizers? Are we ready to go into a rigorous program of being able to now produce more fertilizers in-house, more fertilizers on island, rather than depending on imports, Mr. President? And the minister alluded to organic fertilizers, to mulching, to composting. And we cannot continue to stay in our little area and speak of these things, Mr. President. I think the time is now that we start on an island-wide program of educating our farmers, educating our households on how they can utilize the things that are right within our households, right outside of our houses, Mr. President, to look at composting, to look at mulching, to look at organic fertilizers, Mr. President. Mr. President, of course, one of the things that made me very happy is a pronouncement by the minister that at least 3 fish aggregating devices, FADs, will be deployed within this financial year. I find myself, Mr. President, in a situation where not to be biased, but of course, sea farming is more perhaps the area that brings greater interest, obviously, because of my background, Mr. President. And so it brought me great pleasure to hear that pronouncement. The fishers have been clamoring, Mr. President, for some sort of relief. And we also heard the hand-in-hand pronouncement to look at the campaign promise of reducing the tax that was placed on the fuel, Mr. President. Fuel happens to be one of the biggest costs to a fisher. To have to fill at least 3 or 4 tanks of gas totaling at least $500 to $700 on a daily basis, to go out there on the open seas, not knowing what is out there for them, Mr. President, and being able now to be at a position where additional funds will be deployed, giving them the opportunity to reduce on the cost of fuel consumption and fuel usage, being a little more sure that when they venture out, they will be able to come back in with at least the minimum amount required to purchase fuel to go back on another adventure, Mr. President. I think the fishers will find that quite well and quite suiting to help that situation, Mr. President. Of course, we are also looking forward to the presentation by the announcement by the Prime Minister in terms of how he's going to deal with the $1.50 that was imposed on the fishers, Mr. President, by virtue of that tax being added to the fuel. But I think in the interim, and Mr. President, this is a marked progress mark of a government who cares for people. That as much as we cannot deal with all of the issues presented immediately, and we've seen and we've heard, Mr. President, that it seems sometimes I ask myself, have we forgotten how to count, or have we forgotten how to say the months of the year? Because when you hear sometimes persons who are associated with the opposition speak of the things that they've expected this government to achieve in a little over 9 months, Mr. President, that they had gone more than 5 years and they were not able to achieve, you wonder sometimes if you had to go back to the classroom and learn how to count. But a government who cares for the people, Mr. President, understanding that they campaigned on certain aspects, and the $150 tax on the fuel is one of the things, understanding that they cannot snap their fingers and make it disappear, whilst the consultation is going on, Mr. President, to determine the best way to do it, there are interim measures that this government is putting in to ensure that they ease the squeeze, Mr. President. So as of last week, Mr. President, I could have walked to work, and I could have sat with the fishers, Mr. President, and I could have sat with the other members of the fishers cooperatives in St. Lucia, and we could have blown the trumpet of the additional funds that this government is providing for the fishers in order to cushion the blow whilst we wait for the greater relief, Mr. President. Mr. President, of great concern to me as well in the fishing sector is the issue of marketing of the commodity. The reality it is one thing to reduce the cost for the fishers. It is one thing that the fishers can now go out there and extract more fish from the ocean. But the question of where do they sell it, Mr. President, I do not think that it should be the responsibility of the extractor of the resource to also concern themselves with the marketing of the commodity, Mr. President. And what we saw over 5 years, and I will be first to admit that the arrangement with St. Lucia Fish Marketing, it was not working. There was need to look at this entity, Mr. President, and to determine what was the best way forward for this organization, Mr. President. And of course, the previous administration embarked on what we assumed was sustainable discourse to determine where next to take the St. Lucia Fish Marketing Corporation, Mr. President. But the fishers of this country were left with a slap in their face when we woke up one morning and all of a sudden we became aware very, very loosely that this entity had been gifted or given away to a private entity with absolutely no consultation with the fishers as to how that entity was supposed to work and benefit them, Mr. President. And 5 years into the business of the previous administration, the fishers of this country, even when they were hit by the issues of COVID and restrictions to movement, Mr. President, and closures which were necessary to deal with COVID-19, they were left struggling to determine what to do with their fish. And so this new administration, Mr. President, has been now left with this issue, this bobo, this maleng, Mr. President, of what to do with the fish marketing entity. We really do not know where it's at this point, and the fishers are clamoring for answers, Mr. President. And so I'm hoping that this government, Mr. President, with the thrust to put people first, in 9 months, yes, 9 months, we're hoping that by the time we are able to adequately settle down and look at all of these issues, that the St. Lucia fish marketing issue will be an issue no more, Mr. President, an issue no more. An issue no more. because it is important for them to do that, Mr. President. It is important that the fishers have a place. And if we go back in history, Mr. President, and we look at the reason that this entity was established, it was established for a simple reason: to be able to purchase the fish that the fishers land, Mr. President. That was its simple mandate. And like I indicated, it was given away, it was gifted. I'm not sure whether the previous administration was Santa Claus when it came to a particular thing, but they gave it away, Mr. President. They gave it away. And so, Mr. President, I applaud this government with the actions that they've already taken with regards to the sector. A few weeks ago, we sat here and we looked at the amendment to the Agricultural and Fisheries Incentive Act, Mr. President, and I am happy to report that I attended a meeting not too long ago with the Minister of Commerce and the Minister of Agriculture, and that was one of the heated discussions that came up in that consultation, Mr. President. The issue of the Incentives Act, and especially when we zoom in terms of the fishers, the issue of the FAR vehicles for fishers, Mr. President, and I'm happy to report that this government, a government who believes in the cause of the people and championing the cause of the people, saw it fit that as the fishing sector is evolving, that was a necessary move for the fishers of this country, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now turn my attention to the facilities at Savans Bay and Poale, Mr. President. This administration, Mr. President, embarked on a venture to create a more sophisticated and a more advanced, an easier way, a more modernized way for the fishers of the East Coast to do their fishing, Mr. President. And so a jetty was erected at Poale and a jetty at Savans Bay. Accompanying these jetties, Mr. President, was facilities for locker rooms, as we call it, as we refer to it in the sector, Mr. President. And so long after, Mr. President, that the previous administration inherited these facilities are yet to be handed over to the fishers of these communities that they were intended for, Mr. President. And again, I found myself in a very peculiar situation leading up to the elections of 2021, Mr. President, where a certain individual in the constituency of Beaufort North attempted, by association of course, to brainwash the fishers of that community into believing that it was a deliberate move by certain people associated with the then opposition to not open the facility, Mr. President. Easily debunked, Mr. President. The minister responsible for the facilities was a minister of the UWP administration, Mr. President. So how could it have been possible that a single individual within the constituency could have derailed the progress and the process of the project, not an individual in any means within the Ministry of Agriculture? So they went about in an attempt to sally the opposition, the then opposition, and they tooted all sorts of noise and blew all sorts of trumpets, Mr. President. Whilst that administration was in power, whilst that administration formed the government, what is it that prevented them from opening the facility for the fishers, Mr. President? But I am happy to announce, Mr. President, that as of last month, a greater move has been made towards the opening and the handing over of that ceremony. And so finally, one of the things that was keeping, and simple things, Mr. President, very simple things, a Lucilec connection, Mr. President. A Lucilec connection, Mr. President. And I'm happy to announce to this honorable house and to announce to the populace of St. Lucia, Mr. President, that as of last month, Lucilec has been open to be able to go in there. The account has been created, Mr. President, and Lucilec is now looking at the infrastructural activities that is required to be done in order to connect the electricity for the fishers at Savans Bay, Mr. President. Electricity, yes, electricity. That really is all that the previous government needed to do in order to ensure that the facility was open. A government putting people first, Mr. President. Mr. President, again, as I close this area in terms of agriculture and food production, I want to reiterate that I support the ventures of this government in terms of agriculture and food production. I think, of course, there is always more to do. there is always more to do, Mr. President. There is always new ways, there is always a new way to do things, there is always new thinking, and there is always more that needs to be done, and there is always a greater expectation from the people whom we serve. But given our fiscal position, given the external pressures on our finances, Mr. President, I think that our government is well on the way to ensuring that we again set that path, because you have to set a foundation, Mr. President, especially when you did not find one coming in, that our government is set on a path to ensure that we are able to sustain our economy and provide wholesome food to the people of our country, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to speak briefly on the issue of national security, the issue of crime, Mr. President. As the leader of government business alluded in his presentation, it is no secret. It is no secret to any of us that criminal activity has been on the rise, Mr. President. And we have to stop the business of making this issue become a political brawl, Mr. President. I think we as leaders, we owe it to our citizens, we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our people, Mr. President, to ensure that there is a collective front when it comes to dealing with the issues of crime and national security, Mr. President. But it is also the responsibility of the government, Mr. President, to ensure that they create the platforms, that they provide the resources and the tools required by our law enforcement personnel to be able to carry out their responsibility, Mr. President. And so, over the last few months, and yes, over the last 9 months, within the last 9 months, Mr. President, we've seen one area that has been beefed up, Mr. President, is the provision of increased transportation to our police, Mr. President, in order to help them to carry out their duties, Mr. President. And that is just the beginning of things to come for the police, Mr. President. I was very happy, being a Southerner, Mr. President, to hear that finally, after so long, that there will be some much needed and long overdue attention to the Beaufort Police Station. Mr. President, I am yet to understand why, at a time when we all admitted that crime was on the rise, that the police officers of Beaufort had been treated like nomads by the previous administration, Mr. President. Coming from the original home at Binfield, they were moved to Clark Street first, and then back to Binfield in another building, Mr. President, a building that you can stand at and look through the library, Mr. President, and see the police station, Mr. President. The question is, why is it? What is it that has been so complicated and so intricate? And perhaps it's intricate. Perhaps it's a difficult situation to deal with. I don't know. But if that were the case, Mr. President, I would have loved the previous administration and the minister who was then responsible for the police to come out and tell the St. Lucian populace, well, this is the situation at the Beaufort Police Station. It's insurmountable. We cannot deal with it. And this is the reasons why we are taking these decisions. But we never got any of that. What we saw, what was very visible to us, is that the police had been made to move from place to place to place. By the time they had settled on that previous Library Credit Union building on Clark Street, they were moved again, Mr. President. And so how do you expect the police to adequately carry out their responsibilities, Mr. President, if we cannot provide them with the basic things that they need to function? A home, a place where they can go to, where the documents, where the resources are available under a single roof so that they can carry out their responsibility. And so again, I accentuate that as a Southerner, Mr. President, I am very happy that I heard that pronouncement being made by the responsible minister that this long overdue malaise in Beaufort will be dealt with once and for all. Mr. President, there must be a strategic thrust to ensure that we restore confidence of our people in the department charged with the responsibility to protect us. And so, like I indicated, as a government, you must be able to provide the necessary resources for them to carry out their task, Mr. President. There must be a great level of stoic, untainted leadership when it comes to our police force, Mr. President. The adages and the fear that had been created I have to say the perceived, it is perceived, the perceived relationship between partisan and leadership of such an important area in our country, Mr. President. And no government, not the one currently leading this country, not any other, Mr. President, should ever create a situation where the citizens of this country are not sure whether they are coming or whether they are going because the leadership of the police force is tainted or is assumed to be associated openly with any political party. As leaders of this country, we have to ensure that we never put such leaders in these positions, Mr. President, because we need to be able to create a situation where our citizens can trust the police, Mr. President. Yes. Mr. President, coupled with the inability to, in terms of this same ministry, Mr. President, one of the things that was of great concern to persons like me who understand the plight of the average citizen, the underprivileged citizen, Mr. President, is the issue of the distress fund. Mr. President, for 5 years, maybe it's just me, but I could not tell where we were with the distress fund. At one time, it was accessible through the Prime Minister's office. At one time, there were particular parliamentary representatives who would write but not receive responses. Mr. President, it was overwhelming, the stories and the analogies that were drawn.
Senator, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. President.
To conclude your presentation.
In terms of that area, Mr. President, and so as an individual coming from a community and a constituency, a country where I know, Mr. President, that there are a lot of people who have in the past benefited from such a government program, not because they put themselves in a situation, but really a lot of the times they really can't help themselves in terms of the insurance aspect of the plywood houses and so on, Mr. President, knowing that there is a greater level of assurance and a greater level of clarity in terms of how you access these funds, Mr. President. I am very happy that this government saw it fitting to place this fund back and again, it's about how we access it, Mr. President, and it's about the clarity of how you access it and where you go and what you do if you in fact find yourself in a situation knowing that your partisan or your political affiliation will not affect whether you can access this fund, Mr. President. And so I'm very glad to have heard that pronouncement, Mr. President. And the very firefighters, and whilst I'm on that, Mr. President, allow me to extend International Firefighters Day. Yesterday, the firefighters, they celebrated International Firefighters Day, Mr. President. And so I take this opportunity, Mr. President, to thank them for their stellar service to this country. I know as frontline workers, they were under a lot of pressure during COVID-19, coupled with the other routine things that the fire service has to deal with, Mr. President. And the reality is that they did it under very, very trying circumstances. And I do not speak of the COVID-19 circumstances, Mr. President. I speak of the fact that the fire service has been inadequately resourced, Mr. President, inadequately resourced. If you ever look closely at any clip where the fire personnel is to go on out of fire, Mr. President, you see the safety equipment that they're wearing, Mr. President. It is not up to standard in terms of what they should be wearing, Mr. President. And it is a direct result of the fact that they have been neglected over the last 5 years, Mr. President. We saw the fire service embarking on capital projects, on all sorts of things, Mr. President, which perhaps are necessary to a particular degree. But the most fundamental things is the security and the safety of the fire personnel who walk into burning buildings, Mr. President, who go out there to save our people, to save lives and to save property, and they were not given the respect that were due to them by ensuring that they had proper safety equipment, Mr. President. This is absurd, Mr. President. And so I'm happy that there has been a pronouncement by this government to ensure, Mr. President, that these things are looked into and the necessary resources will be provided to the fire service, similarly to the police force, Mr. President. Again, a government who puts the people first. Our frontline workers, Mr. President, our emergency personnel, Mr. President, and the persons whom they are intended to serve, Mr. President, because they will surely benefit from the fire service having the necessary equipment to be able to take care of the needs as they arise, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I close, and of course there are a lot of other things that I could speak of, if in fact I had more time to speak about it, Mr. President, because The pronouncement in this budget warrants, if we have to speak of it, and speak of all of the measures, Mr. President, was pronounced by the Prime Minister to bring relief to our people, Mr. President, I will require so much more time, Mr. President. And so I have decided simply to focus on these, and I know my learned colleagues around the table will give due justice to other aspects of the budget, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, as I close now, I want to implore our St. Lucian people that at this juncture where we find ourselves economically, socially, and the other things that plague us, Mr. President, that it is a juncture where tough but sensitive decisions have to be made, Mr. President. And this is the reason why I lend my full support to the Prime Minister of this country, Mr. President, because as much as the tough decisions have to be made to take us back on a path of good footing, Mr. President, this Prime Minister always shows a level of empathy and a level of sensitivity, Mr. President, for the people in our country who need it most, Mr. President. It is a Prime Minister who always asks when decisions have to be made, how will it affect the most vulnerable within our country, Mr. President? That question is always asked. And it is obvious, Mr. President, that the opposition does not understand that phenomenon, Mr. President, because not too long ago, I found myself in a situation where apparently my freedom of speech seemed to have been almost swept beneath my feet, simply because I spoke up about the housing program that this government has initiated, Mr. President. And I indicated that an individual associated with the opposition, Mr. President, had made a pronouncement that the condition in which a gentleman had been removed and placed in a better condition, Mr. President, was not even fitting for her dog, Mr. President. And this touched me to my very core, Mr. President, because the reality is there are too many people in our country who unfortunately find themselves in situations that are less than lovely, that are less than roses and wine, Mr. President. But the reality is that the opposition cannot relate to situations like that. It's all about fluff and grandeur for them, Mr. President. And so they do not come down to the level of the persons who are most vulnerable in our country and ask the question, how can we remove them from these situations? How can we ensure that the most vulnerable among us is educated? They have access to education. They have devices, Mr. President, to ensure that they can access their schoolwork and so on, Mr. President, to give them an opportunity to move up within the stratas of society. And this is what this government is doing, Mr. President, in terms of their policy direction, Mr. President, ensuring that they look out for the most vulnerable amongst us so that they can feel part and parcel of this society, because they are equally St. Lucians, Mr. President. They are equally St. Lucians. And a government who cares for its people ensure that policies, programs, and procedures are put in place not to keep them in poverty, not to keep them in the conditions where they are at, but to give them an opportunity, Mr. President, a shoulder to lean on so that they can move up the strata, so that they can start to contribute even more meaningfully to our country, Mr. President. And so, Mr. President, by saying all of this, I say, Mr. President, that I am in full support, and I support the motion that has been tabled before us in terms of the budget presented by our Honorable Prime Minister. Mr. President, I thank you, and again I implore St. Lucians to do what they must, Mr. President, to ensure that the implementation aspects of this budget takes flight, Mr. President, because it is one thing for the Prime Minister to make the pronouncement, but it's another thing to ensure that our technocrats who are responsible for the ministries, the permanent secretaries, the accounts departments, and all other personnel within the respective ministries bring these policies to fruition for the betterment of our country and for the betterment of the people of St. Lucia. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Polius.
whether elected or appointed, one of the principal roles of parliamentarians and all of us in here is to raise awareness of issues that constituents and the various interest groups in society bring to us in parliamentary debates. And today, I make my submission on the appropriation bill for the fiscal year 2022-2023, presented by the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the lower house. Mr. President, I represent the views of the masses, the people of this country, particularly those who are being affected miserably across the length and breadth of this country. Those who want to shout out, but can't, because they are being muzzled, silenced, or if and when they do voice their concerns, are being victimized. Mr. President, I am here today to speak on their behalf. And I am sure that the members opposite have the very same intention. For we really cannot debate in a vacuum, okay? We ought to debate by giving due consideration to the sentiments of those who are grossly impacted by the policies and plans of this government and any government for that matter. Having said that, Mr. President, if parliamentarians, and I refer to all parliamentarians, truly value the people of this country, and if this government truly and really put the people first, then my fellow colleagues on the opposite side, Mr. President, and I seek your indulgence as well, Mr. President, to voice the concerns of stakeholders without needless interruptions. Thank you. Mr. President, I will endeavor to confine my presentation to some of the policies and plans of just two sectors, as outlined in the appropriation bill: education and agriculture. Mr. President, I have served in the education system or in the education sector for almost 3 decades. So I have a fairly good understanding of the teaching, learning process and its related activities, as well as some of the dynamics of the education system. Mr. President, we all understand the significance of digital technology and the innumerable ways that new technologies and all their affordances have revolutionized the way that we live, particularly in the 21st century. Doing business, banking, shopping, and working all have been made easier with a click of a mouse. Teaching and learning is by no means an exception, Mr. President. By no means. For we do not only acknowledge the educational possibilities of the various forms of technologies in enhancing instruction and accelerating students' learning and their academic achievement, but we capitalize on these facilities and potentials in reshaping and re-engineering the education system. Mr. President, from an opposition standpoint,
We strongly believe that if something works well and produces desirable outcomes, then it should be continued, not for our personal or political gain, but rather for the benefit of those who have a stake in it.
Coming to that.
On the other hand, if there are limitations and deficiencies in a program, it behooves the leaders and those at the helm to evaluate and to find creative ways to either expand, augment, or improve it so that it becomes more beneficial to our stakeholders and clients. Mr. President, the latter is exactly what the UWP administration did with the laptop program referred to on page 40 of the Prime Minister's presentation of the Appropriation Bill. The Prime Minister on page 40 indicated, and we can all turn our attention to this, and I quote, indicated that the laptop program was abruptly stopped by the last administration. That's unquote. We didn't stop the laptop program as it is erroneously claimed. Right. Mr. President, the truth is, we first of all expanded the laptop program by making almost 10,000 laptops accessible to not only Form 3 students, but to Form 2s, 3s, and 4s at the secondary school level. What is also noteworthy, Mr. President, is that the initiative was further extended to grade 6s at the primary level to facilitate the blended learning modality, and more students at the primary level were expected to receive laptops. Okay. If you just allow me, just allow me. Mr. President, as information and communication technology evolves or advances, the government of the day, and in particular the Ministry of Education, has a key responsibility to step up its game and seek new and innovative ways to ensure quality instruction that is mediated by new technologies is provided. We remain committed to ensuring that our children, the future generation of this nation, are equipped with the requisite skills and new literacies that will not only make them competitive locally, but regionally and internationally. So it is for this reason, among others, Mr. President, that the initiative was upgraded to an e-book program that added much value to the learning experiences of our students. You will have your chance to speak. You will. A total of 5,000 e-books which were equipped with content for 16 Cxc subjects, including math, English, social studies, biology, and so on, were distributed, Mr. President. These e-books were equipped with interactive learning tools and platforms that ensured that no secondary student was left out if the parents could not afford to buy school books. Parents had to worry less about buying school books for their children. And if it meant, and what this meant, is that more money stayed in the pockets of the very same parents. Students they no longer had to buy past papers or get past papers printed in preparation for school-based or regional exams because they had the resources right there on the e-books. Teachers were better equipped to differentiate instruction and to cater to the diverse learning styles and needs of students. Was that a mistake? What was it? You mean a best practices like this was a mistake? So, Mr. President, now that this government has seen it necessary to go back in time and revert to the laptop program at a time when technology is rapidly advancing, secondary school teachers and students want to know if these laptops are better equipped than the e-books provided by the UWP administration. And it's okay to go back to the laptops. Not a problem. We are committed to ensuring that our students, the citizens of this country, gain and develop the competencies that are needed to function adequately in a digital landscape. Parents too want to know if they will now have to go back to buying school books for their Form 3s. They want to know.
You had your chance, my girl.
Mr. President, when a parent says to you, Papa ti mama isala pa ka swing, mwen pata tu avay, mwen te ka fe dejou e gouvernement, yo la je mwen. How do you respond, Mr. President? How do you respond to the plight of those parents who had or who have 2, 3 children and just one smartphone? Yes? And all of them have classes scheduled, sometimes at the same time. What do you say? How do you comfort? How do you reassure those parents? This is an opportunity for this government to step up and to prove to the education sector its commitment to transforming the education system and doing what is necessary for the advancement of education. Let's move forward, not backwards. We are moving forward. Mr. President, there is need for this government to move ahead. Move forward and inject the necessary fiscal resources. And this one is close to my heart, Mr. President. Inject the necessary fiscal resources into the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College to facilitate the completion of its transformation into a fully fledged university. A lot was done in the 5 years. I was part of the process, Mr. President. I helped develop some of the degree programs, so I know what I'm talking about. So to say to the principal and faculty of the college that this government will simply consider the viability of converting the institution into a university, as recorded on page 42 of the Prime Minister's presentation, is nothing but a major insult to the intelligence of the faculty and their intellectual property at SALCC.
Flashing mirrors.
So after all the internal structural adjustments were made, after all the realignment of the vision of the institution in the face of globalization, and in an effort to meet the increasing needs of society, after all those degree programs have been developed, some of which are currently being offered, and after millions of dollars have been spent in the process, we say to our premier tertiary institution that this government will consider or is still pondering on the practicality or feasibility of converting SALCC into a university? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't. Mr. President, in other words, is this government saying to the faculty of SALCC that they are just thinking about it? Nou ka gade a ça? Nou ka gade si possible? How is it possible to attain the ideal of at least one university graduate? It's an ideal. Great. We have to move up. We have to step up. And we have to ensure that our families have the capacity to create a better and brighter future for themselves. But how is that ideal possible and attainable if the very facility that is needed to ensure this happens is still being contemplated? Still being contemplated, Mr. President?
You're still thinking about it?
Still thinking about it.
Oh my God. Preparation gone a long time.
The management and staff of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College eagerly await the nod, accompanied by an injection of the required resources to move ahead. We would understand and we would appreciate that it takes some time. A lot must be done. You don't just get up one day and decide you are going to transform an institution into a university and expect everything to happen in 2 years or 3 years. I'm not contradicting myself. It takes a while. A lot has been done so far. The transformation process went on. And now I believe, and we believe, that the faculty and staff of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College are a lot more ready and they are more prepared at the moment to translate it into what they should and what should happen at the moment.
Build on what has been done.
Let us bring it to fruition and not just say to them that we're still thinking. We are considering the viability.
That's right. Build on it.
We need to move on. Mr. President, I now turn my attention to agriculture. As a subsistent farmer myself, you see, I wear many, I'm a professional, but I wear many hats.
That's right. That's right.
As a subsistent farmer myself, Mr. President, and having been raised in a farming community, I empathize with the banana farmers of the Dennery North Basin and by extension, all farmers in the country. I understand their plight. I hear them. I feel their pain. I have, in my own way, assisted some farmers. You see, Mr. President, when you are intimately involved in an industry, you tend to have a greater appreciation for the struggles and can better relate to the myriad of issues faced by the workers and the respective stakeholders. Lest I am not misconstrued, Mr. President, I am not saying that a parliamentarian must be actively cultivating agricultural products to understand what farmers are going through at this moment. Mr. President, I go to page 32 of the Prime Minister's presentation and I quote, "History has shown that had we added more value to the primary product of bananas, we would have fared much better economically," unquote. I go by what I see in the document. Mr. President, I couldn't agree more with this statement. For what we have come to realize over the years, Mr. President, is that every time Labour forms a government, banana farmers are in trouble. Depuis les bas formés gouvernement en Saint-Lucie, Fama qui ka produit figue en trois cas. These are not my words, Mr. President. I'm representing the voices of the farmers. These are the sentiments of the many farmers across this country. Perhaps you don't remember. Perhaps you were still young, very young. Okay, we remember coupe, pas coupe. We remember that. But you know, Mr. President, it is customary for a UWP government to clean up the mess that the Labour Party always leaves behind in many sectors, including the banana industry. Admittedly, Mr. President, for the past few years, and I just want to concur with those who have gone before me, we have recorded a decline in the production and sale of bananas in this country. And several reasons can be attributed to this decline. Among them include inconsistent production patterns, lack of timely supply of inputs, serious quality problems, and poorly managed structure locally. Mr. President, this government is very much aware of the numerous challenges that confront the industry. They are. The Minister of Agriculture heard it from the horse's mouth, like he recounted on a TV program, Agricole en Mouvement. Following his trip to the UK to engage Phipps and Sainsbury on the possibility of re-establishing a market for bananas. He was told, Mr. President, that the UK wants nothing but quality fruits from St. Lucia, and that they will buy our bananas when the National Fair Trade Organization, NFTO, is better structured and that local farmers are ready to meet the requirements, the quality requirements of the market. Mr. President, the Minister of Agriculture was utterly shocked when he heard FIFs indicate that they are getting better quality bananas from other countries like Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic, and that they do not need St. Lucia bananas to survive. He was utterly shocked. Mr. President, it was for these reasons that the United Workers' Party administration undertook a review of the local structure. A consultant met with all stakeholders, and 3 options were presented to reorganize and to strengthen the NFTO. In subsequent meetings with the NFTO, it was agreed that a joint management structure be adopted in the restructuring of the industry. And we know what transpired. I need not go into the details, Mr. President. Now, most banana farmers who were able to sell their crops during the tenure of the UWP administration, whether they were able to sell a few boxes less than what they produced before, but at least they were able to sell some bananas. Mr. President, you know what they do now? They have either stopped cultivating bananas or supply to the black market or chop down their bananas, their banana plants, and give to the livestock farmers for the animals, or they simply allow the fruits to rot. I have first-hand experience of this. I know what I'm talking about. Remember, you will have your time. I don't want to respond to this to you directly.
Senator, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
Your
President.
contribution.
Mr. President, the banana farmers of this country want answers, and they want those answers now. So, à présent, farmer qui a produit figue, farmer d'Henry North, farmer Babono, farmer qui a produit figue, qui a sorti Mikou, yo pas qu'à faire gouvernement les bas la peine encore? We need to ask. This government made farmers believe that they would miraculously obtain markets and solve the woes of the banana industry just like that. It's all part of it. Listen carefully. We're talking about the wars, the struggles of the banana industry. Whether we sell to France or the UK or any other destination, we are still referring to the struggles and market-related issues of the banana industry.
But you need to fix it and stop blaming other people. Government, run the country, man.
But you know what, Mr. President? Bagay vini pli mauvais. Bagay vini pli mauvais. Yon ti sak guano qui a pesé 50 livres, qui te ka coûté presque $42. Vous savez combien il a coûté à présent? Ou pas qu'à acheter guano, ou pas savent. Moi qu'à acheter guano, moi savent, Monsieur le Président. Il a coûté $120. Mr. President, under a UWP administration, a 50-pound bag of NPK fertilizer cost $42.50.
Heavily subsidized.
Heavily subsidized. And now farmers have to pay $120 for the same amount of fertilizer, almost 3 times the amount.
You all hear about it?
Subsidize it. Subsidize it.
Under a Flabo government, farmers paid $90
The revenue is there.
for a 100-pound bag of NPK fertilizer, but now have to pay $250 for the same bag, almost 3 times the amount. And so how does this government expect the farmers to continue with their cultivation if the price of inputs has skyrocketed and the government has not articulated any plans to incentivize or compensate farmers while they continue negotiations for a viable market for exports? Mr. President, what do you say to the banana farmers who have depended solely on banana cultivation to feed their families? How do you reassure the farmers who hold 2 farms, 3, who invested so much in the industry, only to realize now that they cannot continue? They have to send their workers home. So you see, it's like a domino effect, you know, Mr. President. They cannot pay their mortgage. Are we suggesting to the farmers that investing so heavily into bananas was a mistake too? Was it a mistake? The banana farmers of this country want to know. And they beg of this government. They want to know what is happening. They want this government to show them, not tell them, no more lip service. Show them that they are better and are committed to strengthening the industry. So what do the farmers do in the interim? Diversify? What about the supplies? We've heard the leader of government business mention the availability of some inputs, some supplies. What are you? Where are they? They need to get to the farmers.
That's right.
And where is the money to invest? Mr. President, what I have found most baffling, and I have to repeat, baffling, for want of a better word, Mr. President, is that this government assigned a forestry officer, as competent as he is, my very good friend, assigned this minister to the Ministry of Agriculture instead of another minister who they had claimed to be the best minister of agriculture the industry had ever seen. At a time when the banana industry is in dire need of restructuring and strengthening and to avert its possible collapse. Mr. President, the farmers in this country are apprehensive. You know what one told me, Mr. President? And the same sentiment was echoed by several other farmers. Isam, ça lè nous besoin fixer ici, c'est l'autre pays nous prenne pour acheter. That signals something very, very serious. You know, Mr. President, it does. And is it also an indication that very soon the majority of our banana fields will turn into forest? Wrong move. Wrong move, Mr. President. Wrong move. Mr. President, I challenge this government to prove to the citizens of this country in more practical ways. Let's get it out of there. Still at conceptualization stage, We don't want it abstract anymore. Let's make it more practical. Show the people of this country how it intends to add value to bananas. Now is the time, and I believe it is ripe. The time is ripe. It is the right time as well to introduce the processing. And not just this government. I think it is a problem that we have had for a long time. We produce the raw material, but we don't process. So now is a good time to introduce the processing of banana and other related crops. Let it be a government intervention. We want to see a direct investment in an agro-processing plant. Mr. President, I'm not sure if you remember Aunt Lucy. Aunt Lucy's in Dennery North. More specifically, that was house in Grand Ravine. I remember that very well as a child. We want to see this government encouraging local entrepreneurship in the banana industry. Provide the technical and fiscal support needed. Train young people in food processing. Motivate farmers by procuring and subsidizing inputs and supplies. Secure more regional and international markets for our agricultural products. Give farmers the assurance that you are committed to revamping and bringing stability back to the industry. You were elected to do better. Do it.
That's right.
The people of St. Lucia deserve it. Mr. President, to conclude, I want to reiterate that the budget debate is the most important and eagerly awaited debate in Parliament. It is the opportunity for our citizens to hear the plans, the policies for each and every sector of the economy. As an appointed member, I truly appreciate that privilege and right to speak as afforded to me under the standing orders. And now I end my submission, Mr. President, in this honorable House. I really want to thank you and to thank my colleagues opposite, the members opposite as well, for your patience and indulgence in allowing me to voice the concerns of some of the sectors in this economy. I thank you.
Senator Aziz.
Mr. President, allow me to extend my appreciation to the many hearts and minds who participated in the crafting of the 2022-2023 national budget. At its very root, it seems to be a very good attempt at addressing the monumental social and economic issues facing our small island developing state. Indeed, even before we are yet fully recovered from the global pandemic, uncertainties brought about by the warring of global powers, looming climate change-related disasters, and loss of pre-pandemic gains for our tiny island economy are more than sufficient to erode our mental health and frustrate our hope in a better tomorrow. But I believe national budgets are generally designed to inspire hope and build confidence. They serve as a call to action that will ignite spending, attract investment, generate jobs, and cushion the hardships among the poor and working class. Moreover, they are a blueprint of how effectively we will cope with current challenges while pivoting to achieve growth and development. Mr. President, year on year, our budget seems to grow larger and larger as we try to make good on this blueprint. This year, our biggest budget to date promises more social stabilization support, increased employment, and more investments. This, in principle, is highly commendable. Of notable interest is that 73% of the allocations seem to be going towards recurrent expenditures. Year on year, the same departments receive the lion's share of our state finances, and again this year, I wonder about the performance indicators that might suggest that this should simply automatically be so, or should we be doing more, or even less based on the performance of some of these departments. Violent crimes, youth unemployment, non-communicable diseases are all at an alarming high level. Yet, the estimates of revenue and expenditures suggest that we continue to pledge hundreds of millions of dollars each year to departments charged with addressing these problems. Mr. President, are we happy with the returns on this investment in recent years? Our 2021 Economic and Social Review paints a troubling picture of the overall unemployment rate standing at 21.9% as of last year, the highest it has ever been. Worse still is that it reflects gender disparities, with our women sadly faring the worst as usual. Globally, the ILO brief Building Forward Fairer shows that women have suffered disproportionate job and income losses because of their overrepresentation in the hardest hit sectors, such as accommodation and food services and the manufacturing sector. 21.9% accounts for 22,280 people who are capable of making a contribution to our country's development, but are denied this opportunity for one reason or another. While we are grateful that the retail and wholesale sector employed the most workers, followed by hospitality and food services, I cannot help but wonder about the psychological and emotional turmoil being felt by over 20,000 individuals and their families at this time due to lack of employment. Mr. President, youth unemployment hovers around 37% in St. Lucia, as per the same review. Young, able hands and impressionable minds look anxiously at government to ease the pressure through its youth economy agenda, an agenda that promises support services and business opportunities to integrate young people into the blue, green, and orange economies. This is a welcome breath of fresh air. And I know that it excites a block of civil society actors who themselves are committed to supporting our youth. Youth entrepreneurship has been a topic of great importance in the modern world, as it is seen as a key component in the development and growth of society. It is because entrepreneurship allows young people to secure their financial future and build a better life for themselves and their families, which is, of course, a major incentive. One of the most important ways in which entrepreneurship can be used to impact young people is the process of providing them with the tools and resources they need to start their own businesses. My only concern, Mr. President, is whether we are bold and brave enough to think outside the box when it comes to providing this support to our youth. Are we bold and brave enough to put grant financing towards their innovative and creative spirits? Are we bold and brave enough to put financing towards their aspirations to ensure that they can create the next big app or the next big gaming platform? Are we bold and brave enough to support them to become the next social media influencer or fashion designer, the next entertainer or creative writer, the next storyteller or playwright, the next community-based business startup? I hope that we are bold and brave enough to do so, and that when the time comes to transfer the funds, we don't burden them with arduous demands for collateral, detailed business plans, interest rates, and other demands which have frustrated them in the past and left millions of dollars sitting in accounts untouched, while the potential of our youth is wasted away. And I speak of these opportunities, Mr. President, from personal experience. I remember just 2-3 years ago, a young man, 2 children, 1 wife, walks in to my office asking for $40,000 worth of loan financing to reinvest in a small project that he had to cultivate mushrooms. Some of the representatives of the association were in the room at the time, and listening to this young man's plight, agreed to make an allocation of $25,000 to him. A loan facility that was pledged or connected towards a revolving fund. In the height of the pandemic, his business actually grew, providing consumers with mushrooms as everyone started to pursue a healthier diet and the health craze ignited. Today, people are lined up, and he himself is unavailable to meet the growing demand that has, quote-unquote, mushroomed around his business. Now the question is, can he now work to help train others to meet this industry that has now been that has now expanded, opened, and that he has been so involved in creating? I remember also another story of another farmer producing pineapples, wanting to integrate into the tourism industry. And through the SLHDA, we were able to facilitate markets for him. And within 2 short years, he's able to take his family on a well-needed vacation. His business has expanded and has become such a remarkable best practice. A few months ago, the Ministry of Tourism connected us with a young entrepreneur who owns a company called Let It Lather, a young soap maker. The SLHD undertook the request from the Ministry of Tourism to work with this young lady to try to integrate her into business opportunities within the sector. Shortly after that presentation, others came in through the door, ideas on organizing events, designing wedding dresses. Tremendous potential just oozing out. Youth entrepreneurship has the potential to solve some of the most pressing problems facing our world today. Youth have been at the forefront of the most innovative and impactful companies of our time. I don't need to tell anyone here that they are the driving force behind the next generation of innovation, if we can inspire them. Because if we are not that hope and that support to these young people, then criminal elements will do for them what we fail to do. Speaking of criminal elements, Mr. President, the issue of violent crimes continue to be of grave concern among citizens and the business community. Last year, we allocated over $119 million to the Department of Home Affairs and National Security. This year, $120 million is being allocated, and yet violent crimes continue at an unbearable level. The longer this pervades, the less socioeconomic progress our country is likely to make. It will undermine everything else we are trying to accomplish. This is because violent crimes is a major drain on the nation's economy. It causes money to be spent on the justice system, on policing, on prisons, and on the rehabilitation of offenders, instead of on the things that would improve the socioeconomic development of the country, such as schools, hospitals, roads, and other things that would improve the lives of the people. Because of its complexity and importance, government cannot tackle crime alone or in isolation from the wider community. If past experiences have taught us anything, is that we have to work together to address the root cause of crime. It then begs the question, how effectively can we collaborate with civil society to train young parents in the art of parenting and child development, the art of financial management, the art of mediation and conflict resolution, and other emotionally intelligent self-enhancement skills? More critically now than ever, Mr. President, we need to be engaged in nation building instead of political tribalism. We need to address the root causes of the hate and anger that pits our youth against each other in mortal combat. Civil society can help if we embrace their outreach, if we are willing to listen and allow them the opportunity to connect us to resources and talent to make the unachievable happen in the shortest possible time. If violence wasn't just a symptom of a broken criminal system, what would we do differently? If it wasn't a symptom only of lack of jobs and opportunities, what if it was also a symptom of a deeply broken economic, social, and political fabric? These chasms manifest themselves in the form of recurrent cycles of violence and despair in our communities, which only exacerbates the problems they are intended to solve. As a result, the cycle continues, often with deadly consequences. As parliamentarians, as business leaders, as thought leaders, can we hold ourselves to a higher value system of quality communication and respectful engagement, knowing very well that our youth are paying attention to what it is we do, they're paying attention to how we do what we do, and they are taking impressions from that and following suit. Our very education system needs radical reform to incorporate these very life skills in our kids at the earliest stages. This year, we will be spending another $200 million on education. Money well spent if we can ensure that our youth graduate with the skill sets to make them great social and corporate citizens first and foremost. Our secondary school students seem to be doing quite well in the areas of general and technical proficiency. However, with artificial intelligence set to make jobs in healthcare, agriculture, and manufacturing obsolete by 2030, we have to provide remedial assistance to students in the areas of mathematics, sciences, and soft skills development if we are to give them a competitive advantage within the next few years. For $200 million a year, our education system must be able to nurture greater numbers of job-ready and business-minded citizens who possess the emotional intelligence to resolve conflict responsibly and to manage the stresses of the new world. For $200 million a year, how can we put our school infrastructure to greater use after normal school hours? And if we don't have the answers, can we engage our communities to think outside the box and put other similar state-built institutions to more effective uses in addition to what they are currently being used for? While the laptop program for students initiative is a welcome exercise and absorbing the cost of exams for CXC-ready students, too many homes and communities are still without Wi-Fi for students to access after school hours. Mr. President, this decade beckons us to become more resilient by designing more sustainable approaches to economic growth and development. Creative thinking, research, and innovation must permeate our recovery efforts at all levels if we are to build momentum. Within this budget, I see numerous sparks of potential if the programs are to be executed quickly, if the programs are to be executed faithfully. Mr. President, healthcare reform is perhaps as important as nurturing the talent and education of our youth and investing in the digital revolution. Vaccines save lives, but so do clean water and sanitation. Unlike vaccines, which are designed to protect people from infectious diseases, community-level health interventions should be designed to protect people from the effects of malnutrition and help them to build stronger immune systems. By providing vitamins and mineral supplements to families in need, we may be able to foster better health in our communities and save money in the long term as a result of these preventative measures. By raising the nutritional standards for food served in schools, we can ensure that students have access to the nutrients they need to perform well in school and grow into strong, healthy adults. Much is being spoken about agro-processing and how we can convert traditional food that many globally have frowned upon in the past, coconut oil, cassava, breadfruit. How can we produce these, process them, and incorporate them into the dietary needs and the nutritional needs for our students, for our schools, for our communities? These interventions are low cost, proven to work, and should be a critical part of our plan to build a stronger, healthier St. Lucia. One of the greatest challenges we face as a nation is that of creating healthier citizens. Unfortunately, our diets have become less nutritious over time. The shortfall in our diet, sedentary lifestyles, and poor stress management have been linked to a number of chronic diseases plaguing our communities at this time, including cardiovascular disease, cancers, and type 2 diabetes. Mr. President, across the globe, healthcare providers have been quick to realize the benefits of telehealth or telemedicine in the wake of the pandemic. Many healthcare providers across the world have implemented telehealth programs to connect with on-demand care providers to provide remote, around-the-clock care to their patients. The same technology that can provide critical care to people in remote locations can also be used to provide remote medical advice and consultation to people who might not otherwise be able to see a doctor. I have not heard much spoken about this in our national budget, but I am not sure if it forms part of the $182 million allocations for the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and Elderly Affairs. Our high food import bill points to an exceptional opportunity for our local agro-producers to meet local demand using the latest technology in food production to ensure dependable supply year-round. To unlock this potential, Mr. President, I look forward to an effective land bank program that has been spoken about, but I also hope that it will be easily accessible for youth groups and small partnerships. Some of the frustration that plagues our youth is not only the access to these opportunities within reachable proximities, not only the access to to finances to help make it a reality to procure the equipment they need, but also to access the support services and guidance from the relevant ministries and departments who are receiving the lion's share of this budget to offer guidance and assistance to these young people. Even while I sat here in the House this morning, I received a text message from a colleague appealing on behalf of another young man who has access to land but is so frustrated because of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Tourism. He cannot get the guidance and the support he needs to turn that into a viable enterprise. I applaud the kitchen garden initiatives in our schools. However, this best practice is something we can certainly encourage at a domestic level. At the height of the pandemic in 2020, we heard so much about this concept. However, a mere 2 years later, as we return to near normal lifestyles, we hear less and less of this practice. It could be amazing if we could incentivize domestic aquaponics by reducing duties and providing low-interest loans to persons keen on setting up a home-based aquaponics facility for domestic consumption. Mr. President, I wish to add my support for the efforts at enhancing public sector efficiency and productivity through the promise of the DigiGov initiative. Digitizing some government services is something we have heard about in recent years, and we have seen slivers of that opportunity, but we are yet to see the wholesale application of these efforts. We have made marginal gains in this area, but this needs to be approached with a sense of commercial urgency. In the last decade or so, there have been many calls for greater efficiency and better service delivery from the public sector. The idea of digitizing government has been talked about in public, but we have yet to see these wholesale applications. We need to understand where is it being held back and what more do we need to do to make this more widespread and make its introduction more wholesale. The private sector is littered with complaints about the dis-ease of doing business, and if we are to unlock the potential of a youth economy, there may be some innovative ideas from our youth on how we can fast-track this reform. If not, we run the risk of it frustrating a cohort of young investors, young entrepreneurs, if we plug them in to this archaic system. Mr. President, the decade ahead will be a defining one for island economies like ours. Rising tides, increased storms, and climate change will continue to have a massive impact on small island developing states, often acting as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is clear that the climate change challenge will continue to act as a constraint on long-term economic growth and development. However, this is also an opportunity to design strategies and approaches for more sustainable and resilient growth. As small island developing states, we have a unique opportunity to help lead the way to a more resilient future for our people. We must build on what we've learned from the past decade and design more sustainable approaches to economic growth and development. We must build on small steps which have already been taken, regardless of the political affiliation of those who have pioneered those small steps, and begin to scale up on these best practices. We must also continue to learn from each other, because each of us has something to offer and bring to the table, and by that we will build stronger partnerships towards our collective good. Over the next decade, states such as St. Lucia will be called upon to do more with less. The twin threats of climate change and economic dislocation will continue to relentlessly chip away at the fabric of our way of life. This will require us to be more resilient, be more creative, be more innovative, but more importantly, it will require us to design our economic futures in a way that builds better foundations for the future. Once upon a time, we were conveniently able to think in 5-year spurts. Now, one wonders what the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months hold because of the uncertainty that rages globally. Mr. President, notwithstanding these uncertainties, I have a deep-rooted conviction that as a people we are strong and we are resilient. We have survived numerous natural and health challenges in recent years, but the last few years have taken a toll on our communities, leaving many of us still struggling to provide for our families. Through hard work, we have emerged from these disasters in the past stronger, more determined than ever to build a better future for ourselves, our children, and our communities. For these reasons, we are even more attentive to government's actions. Too many of us have been burnt, locked out, unconsulted, ostracized from the very development of our country. I believe people wish to have a say. They want to participate, and they want their ideas to be incorporated in the next steps so that a token few don't get the bragging rights on consultation, meaningless consultation, hollow consultation. From this passion of our people to want to make a contribution, transparency and accountability have become the watchwords of our day, and I have no doubt that these principles will oversee the implementation of this year's national budget policies now more than ever. What we have before us are thoughts.
Senator, you have 15 minutes left to conclude your presentation.
Thank you. What we have before us are thoughts, great ideas, and honorable intent. The true impact will be felt when the policies and programs are faithfully implemented with pinpoint accuracy. Let us now roll up our sleeves and recommit to the business of serving our people and our beautiful country. Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I think is becoming my habit, I'm following Senator Aziz and his very well thought out and very well presented presentation. And so I'm hoping to associate myself with him and do half the work that I might have done otherwise. But that being said, Mr. President, as I rise to make my maiden contribution in this August House on an appropriation bill, I'm filled with a sense of awe, but also a sense of humility. Awe because, as I think a number of speakers have indicated this morning, this is perhaps one of the most serious undertakings that a legislative member has to engage in. We are considering the proposals of the government, not just the money, but the policies that underlie the actions that the government is hoping to take within this year and set the foundation for future activities. It is enabling us to contribute to the development of our country. And in an ideal participatory democracy, everybody would have this opportunity. But that is not the case. And as an independent senator, I cherish the opportunity that I've been given to contribute to that discourse. I don't think this is merely a talk shop, and I hope that the government side does take the points that are being made both by the opposition and the independent senators into consideration, maybe not so much in this budget, but going forward in determining their plans and how they put things together. And so I promise to give my unrestrained critique to the budgetary proposals, and hopefully in that way put forward some ideas that can be considered going
as we plot the development and progress of St. Lucia. But I'm also very, very humbled because I recognize that I'm here not through anything that I've done personally, but through the grace of God first, and also the hard work of my parents and others. I grew up literally just down the road from this house on St. Louis Street. I'm not somebody who comes from any house or family of great repute, although there are some persons who are well known. You know how it is. There are some members who are well known, but we are a modest family. And so I have gotten to where I have gotten largely through the efforts of others who have helped shape me, and particularly through the education system. I was very fortunate, I believe, to have gone to the best schools in St. Lucia. I started off at San Souci Government School, as it was then, now the Carmen Rennie Memorial School, and then I went on to St. Mary's. I know that might raise some eyebrows, and persons might challenge it, but I believe St. Mary's is still the best school on island. Best school on island. It goes without challenge. But that opportunity which I've had, sadly, is not the opportunity that most persons have had. A lot of persons have been kept out of the education that I've enjoyed. And so I will begin my discussion on the budget by looking at the issues or the education, for the education sector, or the proposal, sorry, I should say, for the education sector. It's somewhat of a cliche to say that education is the building block or the foundation of modern society. Through a viable and a properly organized education system, we have the capacity to expand the opportunities for persons and give them the opportunity to succeed not just locally, but regionally and worldwide. However, I'm sure most of you will agree that when we look at the education system as it currently exists, it continues to frustrate and alienate a lot of our youth. It is overly rigid and seeks to streamline persons into a very narrow stream. It does not provide the necessary skills that our industries require, nor does it fire the imagination or the hopes and dreams of our young persons. The failures of the system are palpable. On every block, in every community, there are young men and women who are unemployed, either because they did not successfully complete school. They're filled with young men and women who are unemployed, either because they have not successfully completed school, or because having completed school, they don't have the skills that our employers actually want. We need to ensure that our education system serves every student, not just the persons who are academically inclined, and not just the persons who are best suited to the system as it exists right now. We need to move away from our quasi-colonial education system that, as I see it, is designed merely to ration what we think are limited resources and oftentimes to fail people. What you find is at every level we are just cutting down, taking persons out of the education system. So at common entrance, you have a certain number of persons. I know moving to CPEA now, and hopefully that will create a change. But we still have to make sure that everybody that comes through the primary school system is taken on to the secondary school system and allowed to grow and progress there. We need to reimagine and redesign our education system so that it no longer is based on very linear thinking and planning that exists in silos. I was very heartened to hear that an emphasis of the government this year, and I guess going forward, will be the development of the TVET system. The fourth United Nations Sustainable Goal is aimed at ensuring inclusive, equitable, and quality education and the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all. To my mind, and in fact, under the United Nations goal, TVET is a specialized area, an area of special emphasis. And it aligns very well, I think, if you think about it, in terms of ensuring that persons have a capacity to develop themselves, not just at school level, but throughout their lives. However, when I listened to the presentation of the Minister of Education, I was a little concerned that the emphasis might be, as we tend to do, again, keeping things in silos. So either you academically inclined or you TVET inclined, and never the two shall meet. I would encourage us going forward to ensure that all schools in St. Lucia have a TVET program, and that all persons are required, or have the opportunity, I should say, to engage in some sort of TVET training. And when I discuss TVET, I mean it in the widest possible sense, not just thinking about carpentry and masonry and cooking, for example, but all areas. So ICT, music, arts, theater, film, whatever you can think of. As long as it doesn't fall within the traditional academic subjects, I believe it should be part of our TVET curriculum, and we should allow persons to engage in it. Additionally, we must ensure that the education curriculum in general becomes very relevant to the realities of modern life. It makes no sense to train persons in TVET courses and they don't know how to run a business. They don't know how to file taxes or to navigate the government or institutional bureaucracies that they're likely to face when leaving schools. Again, I think what I'm trying to get at and trying to emphasize, we need to make sure that we develop an education system that is integrated, that does not look at things as separate elements that don't have any relationship to the other. So somebody who's going into agriculture must understand entrepreneurship. They must understand how to manage money. They must understand how to develop their business. They must obviously understand agriculture, so they must know what they're doing, but it needs to go beyond that. And similarly, persons who are engaged in music, persons who are engaged in the arts, they must understand the economic side of things. I would also like us to think in very, very broad senses in how we implement the TVET curriculum. I looked at Barbados and I was noted that, for example, the school, the high school, or the tertiary school, has as part of their tourism training program, they're running an operation of a hotel. I think we need to make sure that when we are training persons in these areas, we move into that practical area as quickly as possible. So that persons are not just building this lectern, for example, and saying, I've done a project and I know how to build furniture. We have schools that have woodworking classes and all the benches and chairs are broken down. The doors are off the hinges. Minor repairs that the students could get involved in are not being used for. And so they're developing supposedly skills, but don't have any practical experience in using them because they're not being given the opportunity. I would look forward to the day when Sir Arthur has a fully operational hotel attached to it, where you have not just the hospitality students being part of running this hotel, where they'll run the front desk, run the restaurant, run the accounts, but also have the maintenance staff coming out of Sir Arthur. So the construction and engineering students can have practical experience. The AC persons can have practical experience in actually working. And I think part of the complaints that employers often have is that students coming out of school don't have any real-world experience. You actually now have to train them. And so we can fill that gap by putting into place apprenticeship systems or programs, as well as, I hope, as I said, a full-fledged hotel at some point. Now, I know I'm going to step into a bit of a political debate a little bit, but for me, I don't know why we're still having a discussion over the laptop program. To my mind, a laptop is no longer even something that has to be questioned as part of your school requirements. A laptop should be a basic entitlement of every student in St. Lucia. As the debate was going on, I was just considering, when I started university, a way back, nobody had a laptop. When you had printed or written work to do, you actually had to find a typist, pay them to put together your project. I'm as old as that. I know I don't look it, but I'm as old as that. But by the third year of my degree, it had gotten to the point where most persons had laptops. So I no longer had to pay for something. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford one at that time. So I had to find somebody who had a laptop to then prepare my project myself. But fortunately, by the first year of my law program, I had moved with the times and I had a laptop. But everybody in my year pretty much had one. By the time I had then gone on to my master's with it, and this is within a 6-year period of time, to show you how quickly things can move. It was a requirement that you had a laptop to come to the classes because the lecturers are not giving you printed notes. They're not giving you anything. They're not writing on a board. You needed to have a laptop so you could download your assignments, download your lectures. Technology has moved beyond that by now. And so it's no longer a question of whether students should have a laptop. But I think it is a basic entitlement and a basic requirement at this point. I also want to pause to note that I know one of the criticisms, and so to be honest, it caught me initially when the laptop program was first rolled out by the previous SLP administration. And you would be going in through the communities and seeing, because the laptops were very clearly branded, seeing these laptops in very strange areas, doing things that you didn't think were associated necessarily with schoolwork. But then I recognized that for them to have been used in those ways, it meant that the students had acquired sufficient skill to break the security that was on the laptops. And for me, that is the value of education. You don't know where it's going to go, but you make sure that you give the students the opportunity and the skills to learn what they need to learn and allow their innovation to use it in ways that you could not have possibly expected. And so I turn to the youth economy. I note that a sum of $10 million has been allocated to the youth economy, and that has been touted as the future, and that we are going to give the young persons the opportunity to realize their full potential. But the question I have, because it wasn't very clear in the documents that I have, is how is this $10 million going to be spent? I know we have a tendency in St. Lucia to build bureaucracies. I would hate that this $10 million goes into administration rather than training and grants. We need to ensure that these young persons, as my colleague Senator indicated or said, are given the opportunity to bring their ideas to this organization, the board that is going to be set up. And this board is going to take these ideas and allow it and facilitate them, not question them, not restrain them, not try to change them unnecessarily, but to give persons the opportunity to realize their ideas and to pursue them to the fullest. I also question how the youth economy is going to be integrated into the orange economy. As I said, to me, going forward, we need to make sure that our economy is as integrated as possible, and everything we do lends support to the others. I was quite concerned that only $500,000 is being allocated to the creative industries. I recognize that $3 million is going to be given to Carnival, but that is a single undertaking. And whereas I recognize the significance and the importance of Carnival and its economic value, if we are going to be serious about developing the creative industries, we cannot allocate $500,000 to this industry. We need to recognize that it includes not just musicians, because I think sometimes because Dennery segment is always in our face, and Dennery segment is so popular and we enjoy it, we focus on the music side of things. But there's a lot going on in St. Lucia that we don't know about. I'm always surprised when you speak to a young person and you hear that persons have done this sort of movie or this animation, they've written this book, they've done this poem. There's a lot of creative work going on in St. Lucia. And what we need to do, as anything else, is to facilitate it. Just assist and get out of the way. Do not create unnecessary bureaucracies that are going to shackle the creativity of the persons who are engaged in the creative industries. As well, obviously, we have a lot of folk festivals in St. Lucia that I think we need to put some money into as well. Not necessarily because of the economic value that they may bring, but the fact is that they are part of us, and we need to value the things that make us St. Lucian. We need to understand and appreciate the intrinsic value of these activities, and to make sure that we put some money as well as resources behind them so that we can develop them and enjoy them, and also ensure that they continue to grow and exist. The budget, to me, did not speak very much of investment. And I'm saying so in very general terms because obviously mention was made of citizenship by investment, which is going to continue to be a focus point of the government. I noted as well that there's an intention to create a diaspora investment program, and I applaud that because I think too often we neglect our St. Lucian resources overseas. We are very fond of pointing to persons and saying, well, this person is prominent in this area or this industry, has done well for themselves overseas, but we don't engage them. We don't involve them in our local development, and we don't see what resources they may have and be willing to share with us. But on top of that, when I read the Economic and Social Review, it struck me that deposits held locally continue to grow, yet still the loans to asset ratios of our banks continue to plummet. When you think about it, the rate of interest that money that is tied up in the banks is accruing is on average about 1.4%. You may have a little bit more in some cases and a lot less in most cases. When you add the fees and the rates that the banks charge us on top of that, the real interest rate that you are getting on this money is pretty much negligible. That money which is tied up in the banks without onward lending is in essence, and to my mind, dead money. It's not serving us in any practical way. And so I think the government needs to put real thought into how we can unlock that potential. We keep looking for monies from overseas, and I understand the need for foreign direct investment, but too often we are locking locals out of opportunity. There are persons who have cash, they may not have the ideas, they may not have the drive, or they may not have even just the willingness to engage in a business. But if they have an opportunity to invest in a sovereign wealth fund or some other manner in which their monies can grow, they will be willing to do so. And so I think the government going forward needs to look at developing a vehicle that will facilitate access to these funds that are now currently locked in our banks, and that will match investment with opportunity. Or if the government is not willing to do this themselves, and I accept that the government is not a business and therefore is not necessarily in the business, for what a better expression, of investment and earning money in this way, they need to incentivize it so that persons in the private sector can begin to develop hedge funds or real estate trusts or other sorts of businesses where persons can begin to take money out of the banking industry where it is not being used and put it to other productive uses. And as I'm on the banking sector, I would like to encourage the government to take a very serious look at our current banking sector. We had a situation where we had about 5 commercial banks operating in St. Lucia. We are now down to 4, and quite possibly we may be down to 3 very shortly. The reduction in competition is alarming. The benefits that we enjoyed over the last 3 years in terms of slightly easier access to loan financing, reduced rates, was largely driven by competition between those banks. When you remove that competition, you remove the incentive for them to offer us these breaks. It was concerning to me when I looked at things over, or the way the economy was performing over the COVID-19 period that the banks, I understood the necessity for social distancing, but it was always hurtful to me when you walked outside the banks to see the long lines of persons standing in the blazing sun and pouring rain at times, waiting for access to the banks. They did not see the necessity of even just putting an awning or some sort of shade outside of the bank to facilitate their customers. And so again, the quality of customer service is something I think the government needs to look at in terms of making sure that the banks take into consideration the best interest of their customers and take steps to ensure that we are treated in a decent manner. I don't know how many of us have engaged with the bank recently in terms of getting a loan. But I can tell you, because fortunately my profession causes me to interact with all the banks, as well as a lot of persons who engage with the banks, that the process of obtaining a loan, whether it be commercial or residential, is horrendous. Now, if we think that construction is a prime driver of our economy, whether it be residential construction or commercial construction, development of property is a prime driver of our economy. We need to ensure that persons have ready access to this finance. But if it's going to take, on average, 8 months to a year to get a loan, unless you are truly committed to that project, you're going to get frustrated somewhere along the line and drop off. Now, that is when somebody gives up on a project, it's not only them that's being affected by that decision. That's a contractor who's lost a project. In some cases, that is an architect who's lost a project as well. The subcontractors from the contractor have lost employment. The laborers of that contractor have lost employment. So the multiplier that we were counting on from that project has now been removed. And removed why? In some cases, you don't even know. You just know that this process is just taking forever, and the bank is constantly asking you for new things, and you are constantly trying to jump a hurdle to make sure that your project can get off the ground. In some cases, persons are fortunate that they know, a senior manager that they can call to get their loan back on track, but not everyone has that level of access. And so the government needs to engage the ECCB, who often I find is just concerned about regulating and expanding their regulatory jurisdiction, but not so much concerned with the product being offered by the banks and the service being offered by the banks, and how this then plays in as well to the economic development. And so the government needs to step in here, I believe, to ensure that competition is secured and protected, consumer rights and customer rights are, again, protected and promoted, and that economic development can continue because of easier access to finance. Looking at, again, the investments that we've been attracting, I note that the BPO industry is a growing industry. And St. Lucia has positioned itself well in that area. For some reason, they like our accent. They like the way we speak. And so we have a natural affinity for this industry. But I believe, again, that there is tremendous opportunity for us to move away from just solely call centers. St. Lucia has a lot of very bright and well-educated young persons, notwithstanding what I've said about the education system at the beginning of my speech. But there are a lot of bright and underemployed St. Lucians. We need to look at outsourcing in terms of more specialized areas. For example, accounting and HR management. There is a growing industry, for the outsourcing, particularly of backroom accounting services. And I believe that, again, if this is something that we target and that we develop our education system to assist in delivering persons who can compete in this area, that St. Lucia can be well poised. I think we need, and I have this gnawing fear, that we are going to forget a lot of the lessons and opportunities that we had and enjoyed during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we realize that a lot of things that we used to do did not need to be done the way in which we did it. You don't need to go to an office every single day. You can work remotely. And I think we need to ensure that we position ourselves and exploit that opportunity for remote employment, not only in terms of persons in St. Lucia working from home in relation to their employer, but engaging with employers overseas so that they can have a workforce in St. Lucia. I know we have the headquarters legislation. Perhaps, again, this is an opportunity for us to use our existing legislation, our existing structures, to push and promote ourselves further. So if we can encourage and incentivize persons who have headquartered their businesses in St. Lucia to recruit and employ employees in St. Lucia, notwithstanding that they may have operations internationally, that can only redound for the benefit of our economy. I listened very attentively as well to the Honorable Prime Minister as he mentioned his proposals in relation to the tax system. On a number of occasions in this House, I have indicated my view that our tax system needs urgent reform. I'm very happy to hear that the Prime Minister shares my view. And I do welcome the increase in the personal allowance that is going to benefit persons in terms of having some extra money in their pocket at the end of the day. However, I am concerned that constant resort to increasing the personal allowance has the effect of shrinking our tax base, because we are turning continually to a smaller and a smaller number of persons and businesses to support us in terms of income tax and corporation tax. This makes us less resilient.
Senator, you have 15 minutes to conclude your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President. This makes our revenues less resilient because we don't have as wide a possible base to turn to in terms of recovering our revenue. I think as well there needs to be an overhaul of the administration of our tax system. So in addition to looking at our taxes as a whole and ensuring that they capture the widest number of persons and the widest amount of revenue, we also need to look at the way our tax system is administered. Currently, there is little to no enforcement. The tax inspectors tend to take a laissez-faire approach to things. Now, I'm not encouraging that they go out and start auditing everybody, but I think as well there does need to be a little bit more investigation and a little bit more active pursuance of the monies that are due to the revenue. It cannot be a situation where the Inland Revenue waits until somebody has to conduct a transaction and then suddenly pounces on you to say, you know what, you owe house and land tax or you owe income tax. And when you're checking, but to me, I've submitted my tax returns every year, how can I possibly owe? And it's a few years back, an assessment was done, was never shared with you, and all of a sudden you're being called upon to pay loads of tax and penalties and interest. I'm very happy that the Prime Minister has decided to waive some of these penalties and interests to encourage persons to pay their taxes. But I believe we need to make sure that the tax authorities themselves become a little bit more proactive in terms of the way they administer the tax system in St. Lucia. Mr. President, Castries Vision 2030, that was highlighted in the budget. And I thought I needed to mention it particularly because Castries is very dear to me. As I said, I grew up in Castries. I currently work in Castries. It's our capital city. But when you pay a visit to Castries, you really have to question whether it is our capital city and whether it is important. Castries feels and seemed like a neglected area. It's often pointed out that it's surrounded by, I don't like the word ghettos, but in fact it is surrounded by impoverished areas. Our businesses in Castries are dying. Persons are constantly moving out of Castries and moving their business elsewhere. anytime a new and innovative business is started up, bet your bottom dollar it's not located in the capital. There's very little activity beyond a certain period of time at night, and then what activity is literally concentrated around a few bus stands that operate. So you'll get a little business going on around Bridge Street because you have the V4 bus stand there. You'll get a little business operating on the top of Jeremy Street because, again, you have the Grosley bus stand there. But it feels like there has been and there is no plan for the development and the redevelopment, I should say, in fact, of Castries. I noticed and I heard that the Prime Minister indicates that this is going to be a focal point, but from what I heard, it's primarily aimed at touristic kind of activities. I think we need to put proper plans in place to ensure that Castries becomes a shining jewel on St. Lucia. I also give consideration, Mr. President, to the accommodation stock in Castries. We are constantly looking at building housing projects in Talvan. I'm not saying that these areas don't require housing. Talvan, down in PI and so forth. But we are neglecting again the CDCs. To my mind, these are areas that could be redeveloped, doing multi-function housing. So you have housing as well as office space, as well as businesses, and bring a life and vitality back to our capital city. I wish as well, Mr. President, to speak about our halls of justice. As the leader of opposition business noted, I'm a little older than I look. And so therefore, when I first became an attorney, I was fortunate enough to work in the chambers of Mr. Kenneth Mauplezi QC, who was at the time the president of the Bar Association. And one of the documents that I came across in his office was a proposal for the construction of a halls of justice. Many moons have passed since I walked through his office door. And in fact, in some ways, Mr. President, we are now further away from the construction of our halls of justice than we were then. I look sadly on the fact that this project has been allowed to languish for so many years. And to my mind, I put it along with HIA redevelopment, St. Jude's redevelopment, the John Compton Dam desilting, as another example of our inability to complete a national project. Quite simply, Mr. President, we need to get these things done. The fact that we don't have a proper halls of justice says a lot about our attitudes to our institutions in general, because I think we need to recognize that the judiciary is a co-equal part of government. The three arms of government are the legislature, where we are now, and I think we have some comments about the building we're in as well, the executive, and the judiciary. And if we don't put effort into ensuring that these institutions are properly housed, are given the respect that they deserve, and the resources that they need, how can we then be surprised when our government does not operate in the best and most efficient manner? I am not saying, Mr. President, that the construction of our halls of justice will cure all the ills of our justice system, but I am sure that it will improve efficiency and morale amongst the judicial staff. I also look at the issues of crime and crime prevention, and I note that a lot has been made of the backlog of cases and the fact that, we can't get convictions. But I want to caution, Mr. President, that a large chunk of the backlog of the cases does not fall at the feet of the judiciary alone. Steps have to be taken to improve the investigative capacity of the police force, because too often persons who are charged with crimes have to wait until the investigation is completed before their matter can progress. And similarly, the DPP's office is understaffed and under-resourced to handle the multiplicity of matters that they must deal with on an annual basis. Because don't forget, every year we have new matters that are coming through. And if we're not clearing up the backlog, it means we're just adding and adding and adding to the matters that must be addressed. Mr. President, before I resume my seat, I just want to make in passing a comment with regard to agriculture, which I notice has been a little bit of a hot button here this morning. And I wish to tell both sides of the House, las quene semunla. Bananas, basically, in the form that we knew it, is dead. We need to come to that realization and acceptance and stop spending unnecessary resources in trying to raise Lazarus. We need to accept that it is not going to come back in the form that it was, so that we can then restructure it into a new industry. There has to be a reason why St. Lucia is the only Windward Island country that is still holding so tightly onto the banana industry. And I mean, there are other reasons which I will not go into, obviously, but I think the both sides know exactly why that is. But we need to accept that things need to change, and that we need to put some of the resources that we are putting into the banana industry into diversification. As my colleague pointed out, there are a lot of, and again, this is one of the lessons I think we learned during COVID that we need to pay attention to. There was a lot of diversification going on in the banana industry. Every time you went into the supermarket, you were seeing something new on the shelves. Whether it was mushrooms, whether it was microgreens, whether it was radishes, there were a lot of new crops being planted and grown. And I think we need to accept and realize that the future of our agricultural sector does not lie in bananas. It lies elsewhere. And this is where we need to put our efforts and our emphasis. I also want, just before closing, Mr. President, to touch on constitutional reform. As a practicing attorney, the Constitution...
Senator, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a practicing attorney, the Constitution is central to everything I do. But I recognize, again, Mr. President, that the Constitution that we pledge allegiance to, that we adhere to, is not a construct of ourselves. It was essentially handed to us by our colonial masters and is largely a copy and paste of, well, in fact, they don't even have a written constitution, but they created this thing that they've given to us and all the other colonies. And we have held to and continue to hold on to it, despite the fact that it is very clearly not fit for purpose. I am heartened that the Prime Minister has indicated that part of his thrust during the course of his tenure in his government will be to address constitutional reform. I encourage him to do so. I encourage him to take on board the recommendations, because those recommendations in the Constitutional Reform Committee came from the people. We don't have a participatory democracy in its truest sense, and this was one of the opportunities they got to participate in that process. Do not squander it. I believe, Mr. President, that on the whole, however, as my colleague said, the budget offers a lot of sprouts of hope, a lot of potential. The proof is going to be in the pudding, and part of the pudding is actually cooking it. So implementation is going to determine whether we are successful or not. The government needs to focus on getting things done. And once we do so, I believe that we will see the benefits that this budget alludes and points to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move for the suspension of this Senate until 3 p.m., 1 hour for lunch.
Senators, the question is that this sitting of the Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, Say aye. As many as have a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting is suspended.